Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my right is Becky Eads, who's the head of planning, and to the right of that is Louise Milnes, who's the development officer. To the right of that is Tony Clark, who's here from Highways. And on my left is Ange Bealby, who is the democracy officer looking after us today. And to the left of her is Sandra Brannigan, who's the senior solicitor. Down each side of the table are the members of the committee. If I could just, first of all, mention that we're not expecting a fire alarm. So if the alarms do go off, we'll guide you out the building by the nearest access point. If you've got mobile phones with you, if you can please make sure that they're turned off or on silent. Toilets are behind me through the door over my left shoulder. Members of the committee mustn't leave the meeting whilst we're in session, as it were. And if I can just ask members of the public to not go unless you really need to. We may end up having some adjournments during the meeting, depending on how long it's going on for. If we do end up having an adjournment, it's just very important that nobody from the public gallery tries to speak to or interact with any members of the committee, and members of the committee are not to discuss anything to do with the application during the adjournment. You may see some members have laptops. That's because we are sort of transitioning. Some people like to use electronic papers. Some people like to have paper copies. That's why some people have their laptops open. Members of the committee, if I can just ask you all when you're using the microphones, because we've had some issues with sound in this room and in other meetings. If you can just make sure you've got your microphone close to you when you're speaking, and as far as possible, speak towards the microphone rather than turning left or right to address people. We won't think you're rude if you're talking to me, but you're looking that way or that way. In terms of the committee itself, we've got quite a lot of changes from the last time we sat together. There's been one or two things happening over the last few weeks, including some changes to committee. So I'd like to just extend thanks to councillors Hollier, Kelly, Merritt, Steels, Walshaw and Wardby for their time on this committee during the previous municipal year. And I'd like to welcome councillors Jane Burton, Clark, Colwick, Melly and Wan to this committee. I'm also going to note that Councillor Nelson is on maternity leave, so I'm sure we'll all want to extend congratulations to her. She will be covered on this committee by Councillor John Moroney once he's had his planning training, but having only recently been elected, he needs to have his training before he can sit on this committee, so should be here from the next meeting onwards. So we do have a couple of apologies in today's meeting. So Councillor Moroney is being covered today by Councillor Ben Burton. So that's going to be fun later on when we're going to Councillor Burton and having to specify which one. And Councillor Wan is being covered by Councillor Fenton. In terms of the way that today's meeting runs then, it's a business meeting of the council held in public rather than a public meeting per se. There are very specific points where we can have input from the public, and if I can just ask anybody who's sitting in the public gallery not to seek to communicate with members of the committee outside of those very specific points. I've already mentioned about the potential for adjournments during the meeting, but just in terms of the way that the meetings operate, we always follow the same process, but for the benefit of anybody who hasn't seen one of these meetings before, what I'll be doing shortly is inviting the officers to talk us through the plans that we're looking at today. I'll then invite committee members to ask any points of clarification on those plans. We'll then ask the officers to provide any updates that there have been to the report. We then move to the public participation, where we have the opportunity to hear from any supporters or objectors or people who want to make comments. I then ask members to ask any questions that they may have around the report, anything that's been brought up during the public participation, if they need clarification from officers on any points. We then move into debate and discuss what we think about the application before then considering the officer's recommendation. And the process that we follow is we first consider the officer recommendation, make a decision about whether we're happy with that or whether we want to do something different. But only after we've considered the officer recommendation first do we look at any alternative proposal. So hopefully that's all clear, but I'll be following, making sure that we stick to that format as we go through. So on to the main agenda then. So agenda item 1 is declarations of interest. Is there anybody with anything to declare in relation to this? Councillor Stewart first.
Thank you, Jay. I don't think I declared it before on a York Central application. It is obviously on my register of interest, but I sit on the York Central Lead Member Steering Group, which I think is entirely inappropriately named. It makes it sound like we've all got an absolutely pivotal role in decision making. I would describe it more as the York Central for information of a few relevant people, and I sit on there as the Conservative councillor. So I haven't been at those meetings where any decisions have been taken. I haven't been party to anything one way or the other. Literally I have received information on it, so there's nothing prejudicial there for me at all. But to put that on the record as per my members' interest.
Okay, thank you, that's noted. And Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Very similarly, I also sit on the same board. I did just check the remit of the committee, and it is to inform the political leadership. We are apparently able to provide strategic commentary when we feel fit, but other than that, there's no decision making, so I don't think it's a conflict.
Yeah. Okay, agenda item 2 then is the minutes from the last time we met, which was the 16th of May. I've given a couple of typos to Angela, just very, very minor typos. And then I just wanted to propose a change of word. On page 11, there's a series of bullet points, and the very last bullet point in the first section reads, the conveyor belt did not need to be in a straight row. And I'm suggesting we change row for line. I think that just makes it clearer. Unless anybody else had anything else that they wanted to change, can I take those as approved? Okay, thank you. And so that then takes us to agenda item 3, which is the public participation general remit of the committee. We don't have anybody registered under the general remit of the committee. I think we are moving slowly towards removing that item from this agenda list, but that's for further down the line. We will go now to agenda item 4A, which is the main application today, which is a York Central application, and this is a reserve matters application. Full details are in your agenda pack. And Becky, if I can invite you to talk us through.
Thank you, Chair. So the planning application you're considering today is a reserve matters application for layout, scale, appearance, landscaping and access for the erection of a 6-storey plus basement office building in the use class E with ancillary uses, self-contained retail floor space at ground floor, associated car and cycle parking, servicing and access, public realm and other associated infrastructure pursuant to the outline permission. So this is the site location plan. Let me just change my pointer just 2 seconds so you can see it better. There we go. So this is a site location plan and wider context. You can see the application site in red here. The wider context here, this train station here. So this is the site location plan. You can see the site outlined in red here. National Railway Museum Station Hall there. Great Hall over here. And a Google Earth aerial photo so you can navigate yourself to where it is here. Train station, Railway Museum, site down here. So this is the north of the site towards the NRM station home. The view northeast over the square. View northeast towards Leeman Road Tunnel and Marble Arch. Towards the station, you can see the station in the background here. Again, towards the station. View south looking towards the former Cinder Lane that was, again, view west. So this is a site layout with a landscape general arrangement. You can see the plot, which is F1A here. I'll explain the other plots in a second. You can see this is the building, the landscaping, access in here, along with disabled car parking spaces here, and access around here. Well, back to that in a second. Got the general arrangement of the roof plan. I'm going to flick through these next ones fairly quickly because you've got these all on your agenda pack. You've got your ground floor and your first floor plans. You can see the arrangement of the buildings, second and third floor, fourth and fifth, and the proposed 6 in the basement level. To propose north and south elevations. Later on, I will show you some visuals, but as I said to you every time, please base your decisions on these scaled plans that you can see here. You see each of the elevations there. And again, east and west elevations. This is the approved general arrangement for the infrastructure works. That's the previous reserve matters that members have already approved. This is the approved landscaping general arrangement for the square. Members will recall that didn't come to February that came to, which was the approval, so you'll recall that there. This is the accessibility from the blue badge spaces. You can see the circles of there in terms of the accessibility to each of the spaces. Alternative cycle routes for cycles wider than 1.7 meters wide. Again, you can see that information there. Bus routes and bus stops. Again, we've illustrated them on this one. And then cycle routes from the city centre. That's the orange. You'll see it move in a second. From there and along there. That's from Water End. Cycle storage and access points. Again, orange is a cycle storage. And hostile vehicle measures line, you can see there. So this is for just general from the outline parameters plan, which shows the development zones at ground floor level, with your residential up through here, your railway museum, and then your commercial element down here, mixtures. You've then got the wider site context plan. So you can see this is the proposal that you're considering here, which is F1A. You can see that in here is F1B, F2, F3. That's just for you, what you will have seen that in the reports. That's just for reference there. Next to the visuals, these are visuals, but don't base your decision on these. They are visuals. So that's the aerial view of what it would look like. And again, view from the square, as if you were stood in the square looking up towards it. View from the station. And the view, that's the civic facade to the square and framing the NRM's arched opening. Just going to go back through all the slides just to illustrate the site plan for something that we will go into in a minute. So that's it for me at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any questions from members? Just points of clarification on the plans. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, it says there were some concerns over the cycle desire lines. Could you show that to us, please, so we can see what these desire lines are and what the access is in the plan? Page 40, page 5.49, which is about access. In terms of accessing the internal cycle parking spaces, officers raised concerns that the natural design line for cyclists if coming from the city centre would be across a small section of pedestrian area.
What I was referring to there is, obviously, if you're coming from the city centre side, you would be coming down the cycleway here. Your entrances to the building for cycles are here on this back elevation. So the quickest route would be to go along there. But those plans that we showed earlier with the orange lines on are what the applicant would want people accessing the building to use. So they would want people accessing the building from the city centre to come off the cycleway here, up along Hudson Boulevard, down Hudson Lane and into the back of the building. So we raised concerns as officers and highway officers that people will use the shortest route. So the likelihood is to stop on the cycleway here and go here. So that's what we're referring to.
And in terms of that being a pedestrian area, what pedestrians would be using that? What's it access? What is it pedestrian access for? Just access to the doors of the building?
Yeah.
So the only pedestrian access that would be potentially crossed as a desire line is in this application. It's not any other pedestrian areas from
No,
other
it's unlikely
plots.
to be used by
Okay.
other pedestrians because where else to at that point. So yeah, it would be people mainly using the building.
Councillor Eyre, I think supplementary on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did wonder when I saw the cycle route going round why that particular was. I mean, let's be honest, nobody's ever going to use that cycle route. So what is the purpose of having it labelled as a cycle route? Is that because that's the only one that's LTN 120? So we can't call that bit that everybody will use a cycle route? It's quite clear everybody's going to use that. So why have something else labelled as a cycle route that won't be?
Well, that's the question that we as officers asked. And
What was the answer you got?
that they'll use the other route, long route round.
Okay, any further questions on the plans? On the plans? Yeah, Councillor Melly, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Cullen.
It was a question about the phasing and whether everything in the red line area of this application is being developed part of this application, or if it's some bits in future phases, and whether they could just clarify.
I think that's possibly something for a bit later on, because it's just the detail of the plan at the minute.
Okay, there was when Becky was doing a presentation, there very briefly was a bit showing the different phases, but not for long
Alright,
enough for me to
well,
completely
well,
understand the.
While we're here, if we can get to it.
Demonstrate it on here. So it's just this building. So the white part is the building that's been developed, and then you've got the hard landscaping around it. So you've got this area here, which is the parking area and the service bays, this access route down here. This is a rejection loop because this would be controlled. So if vehicles can't get in here, they would be able to turn around and exit. And then you've got cinder snicket along here. So all that hard landscaping that's in colour basically on this plan would be developed. Plot F2, this bit up here and this bit down here would come forward as a future reserve matters application. And also this bit down here, plot F1B, would come forward as a future application. Is that okay?
Okay, Councillor Culwick.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your welcome back to this committee. It's good to be back. I'd be interested if it's possible to have a sense of how the scale, the height and massing of this compares with the environment in terms of what we already know with what is yet to be to come forward, but also just looking across the other side of the station, the obvious kind of comparison would be the principal hotel. Can you give us some idea of how that would compare?
I haven't got anything from the plan.
What this application complies with the outline design code in terms of, I don't know if you remember at the time, we had lots of conversations about a jelly mold and how the things might move slightly within it, but it had to comply with the design guide. This building is in line with that. So it is what we envisaged in terms of heights. In terms of the principles, don't think I can answer that for you accurately. It's 6. I'll go on. Louise might be able to move on.
I can add to that. I mean, in terms of the buildings that are nearby, if you go to paragraph 5.26 in the report, and it talks about the scale. So as Becky's mentioned, the scale and the height of the building sits within the approved parameters. So we're comfortable that, you know, the principles already been established for a building of that height and scale on this plot. But we have set out what the height would be from ordnance datum levels. And I have put a comparison in terms of Station Hall, which it sits immediately adjacent to, Central Hall, which was the new building at the Railway Museum, which members approved through a previous Reserve Matters consent, and Great Hall. So you get an idea that, I mean, obviously the height of Great Hall is 34 metres above ordnance datum. With this building, we're talking about 43.25. So it is, you know, quite high in respect of that, but it accords with what we've agreed at outline stage.
Thank you.
Okay, I saw Councillor Jane Burton first, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Ben Burton.
Back to the height, how does that compare to the former Aviva building that's now Malmaison? Do you know?
I
Is
don't
it-
know off the
no.
top of my head, I'm sorry, no,
Yeah.
I don't.
And Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Hopefully a quick one. The area shown in brown, the paving areas, are they planned to be adopted highway, or are they going to be part of the private development in the future?
The Hudson Boulevard at the top there, that is public highway.
So Hudson Boulevard.
Yeah, they're on at the top. The Snicket, I think that's still to be run through exactly how that would be managed.
Councillor Jane Burton.
I know it's very difficult, but it's this looking at the front and speaking when the microphone's here. We could maybe move them nearer to us because it's really hard to hear from the corner here. Okay.
Okay, any further questions on plans? And note that point, if we can just make sure that we're moving the microphones with us so that everybody can hear in the room and at home as well. If you could just give us any updates on the report, there is a few, I think.
Yes, so in terms of updates, paragraph 1.7 refers to the biscuit warehouse building, just to clarify that that has now been demolished. In terms of consultations, Yorkshire Water just responded to clarify that they had no objections to the amended plans. In terms of paragraph 5.48, there was just a typo on there. It states additional width of it should state an additional width of 0.5 metres, not 2.5 metres. And just to clarify that the council's access officer has been consulted on the proposals throughout the application process, and the access officer's comments are incorporated into the detailed highway response. The additional information has been assessed and the planning balance and the recommendation are unchanged from the published report.
There is also, oh, sorry, that was me. There is also, so we've had late representations today, so we haven't been able to summarise them. They are just attached to your additional information for you to read. I think there's 3 on there. Okay.
Councillor Jane Burton.
I know from the looking through these quickly that they're talking about tactile paving. How does that relate to what the access?
So if you can just pause that and hold that question.
Okay.
I'm not going to take questions on the update at the moment. What we do is we'll
Right,
go to
okay.
public participation next, and then any questions on either the report or the update
Okay.
or anything that we get from members of the public. we can
Sorry,
ask
I'm very
questions.
new.
That's okay, don't you worry. Okay, so I think that's all the updates there. So I'll move us then to the public participation. We have 2 registered speakers today. The first is Flick Williams, who is joining us online. Flick, are you able to hear us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I know that you know the score, but you have 3 minutes to address the committee. You start in your own time, and I'll give you a heads up if I think you're likely to overrun. And then if you can just hold on for a second in case there are any questions from members of the committee, please start when you're ready.
Tactile paving was invented in Japan in 1965. Inspired by Braille, it was introduced as a way for blind and visually impaired people to be able to read the built environment. Its use became widespread in the UK by the 1990s. In some places in suburban York, you can still find drop curbs made only of standard brick, which predates this. So if it is being read underfoot, what is the importance of colour for tactile paving? Well, as the guidance states, only a small proportion of visually impaired people have no sight at all. The majority have sufficient residual vision to detect contrast in tone and colour and can therefore use it to obtain information. So what is the problem with 50 Shades of Grey? Firstly, what sighted planners believe offers sufficient colour contrast often doesn't, depending on light conditions, day or night, the lux level of street lighting, coupled with the light reflectance value of materials, sunny or cloudy, and weather conditions, wet or dry. Secondly, I invite you to take a look at other tactile paving around the city. The grey tactile paving introduced for conservation aesthetics and against the consensus of visually impaired people does not stand the test of time. When Church Street was redone in February 22, there was some contrast between the grey tactile outside St Sampson Centre with the surrounding paving, which was lighter. Go there now and there is none. 2 years of weathering have reduced any tonal contrast to 0, whereas older buff tactiles do retain a contrast even with weathering. Thirdly, the guidance says the use of tactile paving should be consistent. The latest scheme on Foss Islands uses buff tactile paving badly, but at least the colour is correct. Fourthly, the guidance advises the use of grey specifically for conservation areas. This is not such an area, it is brand new redevelopment. The guidance also advises consultation with local groups of visually impaired people, and once again there was none. As this latest guidance was only introduced in 2021, the overwhelming number of VI people in this city and this country will have had mobility training that teaches them buff tactile paving indicates a non-controlled crossing. Consistency needs to apply not just across the city, but more widely. National and international visitors who we might expect in large numbers to use this area, emerging from the rail network through Station Hall to access the NRM, need that consistency. Why has the professional advice of the access officer been excluded from the papers? Is that not what we employ him to do? Finally, the public sector equality duty is laid out in the tactile paving guidance. Tactile paving is for us, for disabled people, to advance our equality in the public realm, nobody else. So reflect, please, on the fact that this decision is being made by you as sighted people, just as it was drawn up by sighted planners, when the advice offered by the access officer, registered blind, is missing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Flick. That was bang on 3 minutes. I'm just going to see if there's any questions from members of the committee. Councillor Jane Burton.
I just want to be very clear, this is very important to have different colours, and is it different colours in other cities?
Is that a question to Flick?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so the standard is to use red for controlled crossings. That's either signal controlled crossings or zebra crossings, and buff tactile paving for non-controlled crossings. And you will find that universally applied across the country. But now increasingly we are seeing grey tactile used under the reasoning that it's conservation area. And very alarmingly, worst of all, we're now seeing, rather than tactile pavers being used, we're seeing paving that has metal studs, which becomes horrendously slippy when wet and offers no visual contrast whatsoever. So yeah, that but reasonably, you know, any visually impaired person who's received mobility training would expect to see buff coloured tactile paving to indicate a non-controlled crossing.
Yeah. And obviously it's in a tourist area as well, so people coming in will expect it to be the same as, because I noticed the buff paving looks very similar to
you're just starting to move into debates and questions to officers.
Okay.
Just in terms of how we manage this, if there's any points of clarification from the public speaker, we ask those at this point. Any points that are raised by the public speaker, we've got the opportunity to come to the officers and ask them for points of clarification around. So if there's any further questions for the public speaker, I'm happy.
She did mention the public sector equality duty, and I just wondered how she felt that, are the tactile pavings mentioned there?
Yes, councillor, I'm very happy to elaborate on that. The tactile paving guidance mentions the public sector equality duty specifically. It refers to the 3 elements of that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The duty to eliminate discrimination, to advance equality of opportunity, and to foster good relations between people with a protected characteristic and those without. But it does actually go further than that very helpfully. It says the equality duty applies to public bodies and others carrying out public functions. It supports good decision making by ensuring public bodies consider how different people will be affected by their activities, helping them to deliver policies and services which are efficient and effective, accessible to all, and which meet different people's needs.
Very clear, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? I'm not seeing hands, so thank you very much for your time today. And obviously you can continue watching the discussion and deliberations on the YouTube channel. Thank you. The next speaker that we have is Alan Cook, who is from Arlington, one of the development partners, I believe the founder actually of Arlington.
Got a slight change. Alan's speaking. Alan's here to answer any questions. I'm going to speak in this place. I'm going to speak.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
Right, so I was going to move on to say we've got two other people registered to speak alongside, but if we're going to switch it around, that's okay. Just for future, if you can come and let me know before in advance so that we know who's here and who's speaking. But I've got your name, don't worry. So it's David Sweeting, I believe. Yeah, so you're Principal Planning Consultant from Avison Young. So if you would like to come up to the table, and I believe then you've got Alan Cook and you've also got Adrian Kemp, who's one of the transport consultants available for questions if there are any. Okay, so you'll have seen then you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a heads up if I think you're running over and there may be questions from members. So over to you.
Good afternoon, my name is David Sweeting. I'm a Planning Director at Avison Young. I'm joined by Homes England, Network Rail, the Government Property Agency, the developer and the technical and design team. We are an extremely exciting milestone on the York Central development, following the recent approval of the first public realm in Museum Square, the commencement of construction on the new Central Hall as part of the NRM works, and the ongoing construction of the infrastructure works. This anchor tenant will deliver the first commercial development in a prime location in York Central. The office building will be the home to 2,600 government employees and will help to trigger the next phase of development of York Central that we as a collective are extremely excited to deliver. Accessibility is at the forefront of the design of this scheme. This includes 16 blue badge spaces, all to be delivered on day one for employees or visitors to the proposed building only, and are all located within 50 metres of the main or secondary entrance to the building. Prioritising the safety of pedestrians and disabled users over cyclists and motorists through the design of Hudson Lane. Provision of a minimum of 250 cycle spaces, of which 18 are accessible. The office building is located in a highly sustainable location, given the proximity to York Railway Station. Alongside this, CYC's draft local transport strategy sets out the vision for York to reduce carbon emissions, traffic congestion, and pollution, and to protect the environment. With this in mind, alongside the travel plan which will align with the approach taken at the government hub recently built in Leeds City Centre, will be to encourage employees to use public transport to get to their workplace. Given the excellent transport connections via rail, bus, and cycle, it is fully expected that a large proportion of the workforce will use these methods. Because of this, the GPA seek to deliver zero parking on site, apart from the 16 blue badge spaces. This position is supported by the Highways Department, subject to a detailed travel plan, which will be completed once the end tenants are confirmed. The proposed development includes an extensive biodiverse roof of approximately 1,000 square metres, which will deliver appropriate habitat for native birds and invertebrate species, and deliver a minimum of 110% biodiversity net gain on site. Sustainability is extremely important to all of us, and proposals aspire to target BREEAM Outstanding, EPC Rating A, Neighbours 5.5 star, PVs, rainwater harvesting, and air source heat pumps. The applicant has listened to the public throughout the development of York Central, and in particular organised 2 events in November 22 and March 23, alongside engagement with CYC officers since July 22.
You've got about 30 seconds left.
Thank you. The principle of development has already been agreed through the outline planning permission, and the scheme is in accordance with the parameters agreed at that stage. The proposed development is supported by your officers, and we look forward to delivering this scheme with construction due to commence early in 2025 and occupation in 27. If you have any questions, my colleagues and I are happy to assist you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So members, if I can indicate if you've got questions. I saw Councillor Whitcroft first, and then if you can just keep your hands up, Paul.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sweeting. I think this question might be for Adrian Kemp, your transport officer. Thank you. So just in relation to one of the objections that was put in by the Holgate Planning Panel on page 23.1, 3.20, there was the discussion around the development relying on more multi-storey car parks being built around there. Obviously, since then, we've had the local transport plan. I was just wondering whether you've engaged with the local transport plan at all in terms of how the development has dealt with car dependency.
You just pop your microphone on.
Apologies. Yeah, Adrian Kemp, WSP Transport Consultant. We've engaged with CYC throughout the development and delivery of this planning application. We've considered the content, the principles and key aims and objectives of the travel plan. And in balance, we've looked at also that York is one of the most sustainable cities, not just in the north of England, but across the country. It has a fantastic walking, cycling and public transport mode share, supported by a fully integrated park and ride system. We think the principles of reducing this to carbon zero sets a precedent. It provides a new way of thinking about the delivery of transport schemes. In the past, we use predict and provide, where we looked at past trends to predict the future. We're now setting a vision and we'll monitor against that vision based upon likelihoods, improvements and future funding. We are aware of the bus service improvement plan that's expected to be delivered in York in the next couple of years, supported by further investment from the Sustainable Transport Fund. So in that respect, we think the delivery of car zero for York Central sets a real positive balance and sets the trajectory that will deliver the aims and visions of York Central.
Supplementary on that, yeah.
Thank you. So just to be absolutely clear, you don't consider the development to be dependent on more multi-storey car parks?
No, not at this stage.
Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Eyre, I think that was your question was supplementary to that as well.
Yeah, it was, so you can take me off the rest of the list as well. So I mean, it was a bit more sort of specific about that. There were 2 multi-storey car parks that referred to there. How many of those do you think will be delivered? And are you absolutely certain that if any of those 2 aren't delivered, there'll be no knock-on impact?
At this moment in time, there's been ongoing conversation beyond the scope of this application. Those conversations are ongoing, but at this moment in time, there's a principle being established to deliver zero car parking across York for the York Central delivery. There is existing interim parking on site that provides provision for existing users, and moving forward, there is expectation that policy intervention supported by funding will deliver a car-free development that doesn't have a knock-on effect. To supplement that, there is a significant investment coming forward from both Homes England and Future 106 contributions that can be used by the council to implement sustainable transport measures. That could be further investment in the public transport network, further enhancement to support the delivery of the travel planning measures, or even enforcement measures to bring in controlled parking zones to minimise impact on residents.
Just to add to that, the applicant, the Government Property Agency, they have delivered a scheme in Leeds, built 3 years ago. The approach there, they will learn from that and develop in this scheme and ensure that the travel plan, the initiatives set out in the travel plan, promote the use of forms for public transport to ensure that the zero parking on site is achievable and that the impact potentially through displacement of car parking spaces is addressed through the travel plan and initiatives set out in there.
Yeah, I will just let you have your supplementary, but I'm just going to, just as a point of clarity, when you're talking about zero car parking and you're talking about car free, that's with the exclusion of, you're not meaning to exclude the blue badge holders. So you've got your blue badge, so it's car light rather than completely car free. Just so that we're clear on that. Councillor Ray.
Yeah, it was just you didn't actually answer the question, and I appreciate what you're saying about other schemes, and those they may have been delivered with the entirety of that. This Reserve Matters had 2 multi-storey car parks that would have been available to this site. The question was, do you envisage either of those 2 to not go ahead? And if so, would that materially impact this scheme? Simply 1 or 2, and yes or no?
Envisage that they won't go ahead. Those car parks were predicated on a predict and provide basis, where we looked at historic trends to set future standards In terms of provision of sustainable alternatives to travel to the site by car, there is spare capacity within the public transport network. York has a fantastic integrated park and ride schedule to which you can arrive in central York from a range of locations, whether the start of that journey starts as a car but ends up as a bus and a short walk to the development here. In the pack presented, we have done some isochrone analysis, and the majority of the station is located within 400 metres of bus stops and bus stops that have access to park and ride. Park and ride services at the front of the station are located approximately 500 metres from the York Central development.
So Station Gateway, multi-storey car park to replace existing car park isn't happening, as far as you're aware.
We're not proposing to use up capacity within the Network Rail car park to provide car parking for the GPA or wider York Central development.
But again, that's not the question. The presumption was that people arriving at the station will use the car.
I think that's probably as good as an answer as you'll get in so much as I thought the question you were asking was about, will the car parking arrangements impact materially upon this application, and you've been told that it won't. And I think when you're then pushing into a specific car park, and is that car park going ahead actually that's not relevant to this particular application.
I wasn't asking whether their usage would impact on that. I was asking whether the absence of the ability to use the station car park would impact on this particular development, because the presumption was, which is why the Holgate planning panel are concerned, is displaced parking from not having multi-storey car parks will end up affecting this particular site. The reserve matters assumed that all the parking in this area would be taken up on those two car parks. If we're losing both those two car parks, that has a significant impact.
But I think, and I won't put words into the applicant's mouth, I'll let you just have one more come back on it. But I think that the answer that you've been given is that they're modelling based on people not actually requiring the cars to come in, and therefore they're not needing those car parks. I believe that that's effectively what they're saying.
Yeah, by having a zero parking position for York Central, we're expecting a modal shift. We are reliant upon the fantastic walking and cycling connections, the extensive public transport network, the investment in public transport, and the incentivization that comes from the significant investment through Section 106.
Can I add to that? So from a vision point of view, we certainly are looking to minimise car use on York Central, clear. If we can do that by taking the reserved matters applications through committee, we would not want to deliver multi-storey car parks. We don't want to encourage car use into York Central. But going back to your specific point about this application, this particular building, you know, the actual applicant has said to us as the delivery partner that they do not want any car parking, hence the way the application is designed.
Okay. Councillor Jane Burton, you put your hand up. I wasn't sure if it was supplementary because I've got quite a few people with questions. If it was very specifically supplementary, I don't mind taking it, but otherwise I'll just put you on my list.
It's about blue badge parking, actually. So,
in general terms.
In terms of what's in the document.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the list then.
Okay.
And I'll just work through. So I'm just going to, because a lot of hands all went up at first. So I've got councillors Benton, Fisher, Ben Burton, Melly and Jane Burton. And I've just seen Councillor Stewart as well. So I'm going to go to Councillor Fenton next.
Thank you, Chair. The issue was raised by the public speaker in relation to tactile paving. My reading of the report is that hard landscaping, finer details will be agreed through condition. Is that something that in the in the discharge of those conditions you would be amenable to looking at type and colour of tactile paving? I just wanted to check whether the discharge of those conditions would provide an opportunity to address the legitimate issues that were raised.
Simple answer is yes. Condition 24 on the outline planning application is where we'd deal with that.
Thank you. I think it's probably just helpful as well, just for clarity, could you put the slide up? If you can just indicate on the slide where the tactile paving in this particular application site is.
The indication that we have is that if you can see these two small, I want to say green just in case I get it wrong. What does it look like in there? Darker grey boxes. That's the tactile paving proposal for this plot here. It should be noted that highways are probably going to want some more up here, given the disabled access space, but we'll work that out through the discharge of the conditions. But it is literally just that area there and potentially another one up here, sit in terms of the tactile paving.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Ben Burton next.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted looking back through the kind of previous design principles and trying to activate streets. I think a slight concern on this one that's been raised elsewhere and exists is kind of along Hudson Boulevard and the lack of active facades, especially in the evenings, because of it being an office space. How do you perceive how the management of the building will work to ensure that Hudson Boulevard remains a kind of active environment during later hours and during usage, I guess?
We've got the architect here if you want him to come up and answer the
No,
question. Do you want me to? Okay.
Limiting it to your registered
Okay.
speakers.
That's fine. So we tested this a lot with the architects and the team in terms of active frontage. This is one of the key principles set out in the outline application to ensure that Hudson Boulevard was activated. And that's why we've brought on the retail unit to create that active frontage, which you can, I don't know whether you can highlight where that is, Becky, on the right hand side of the development of the building. Actually, this plan is the best one to show the active frontage. So the light blue and the pink and the green and the blue are all classed as active frontage in terms of whether they're canteen areas, meeting spaces, the retail unit, just to activate that frontage. There is a requirement to provide a certain amount of plant space, cycle storage, and servicing area. We've reduced the size of the basement significantly because the plant either goes effectively in the basement, the ground floor, or the roof, and reduce the basement to ensure that we meet the carbon emission requirements, or to get the BREEAM outstanding requirement target. All of these sort of sustainability credentials we try to address, and it's balancing how we can provide the maximum amount of active frontage. And we believe the scheme creates that to ensure it's a safe space, Hudson Boulevard, during the night time and during the day. Hopefully that answers your question in terms of active frontage.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I looked through the environmental mitigations that put on this and was very encouraged by some of the things you've done. The incorporation of bird boxes, the green roof, and the planting of native shrubs. There's one area where I think you may have missed out a possibility, which is the provision of Swift bricks. A red brick building, Swift bricks are £20 each. Swifts would love that area because they're well out of the range of predators and things that can get them. There's a river corridor close by, which obviously is going to attract an awful lot of invertebrates. Would you be willing to look at the possibility with your environmental consultants of incorporating some Swift bricks somewhere around the site?
So we discussed the use of the facades for birds, Swift or the like, and from a maintenance perspective and safety perspective, it is something that the end tenant is concerned about in terms of having to maintain, not from the birds, but actually people maintaining it and the security protocols they have to go through. I'm sure it's something that we could test again and look at. There is a condition on the outline that talks about on the reserve matters, a draft condition on there that talks about how we can provide bird boxes on trees or on poles within the development or around the development in the nearby area, and testing that when the lighting design is developed. So it's certainly something we can take back to the developer and the applicant as to whether we can look to install that in the future. But at the moment, from a maintenance perspective, it's one of those things that they are concerned about in terms of people accessing that and from a security perspective.
Can I just jump in? Swift bricks are something we talk about at every strategic board meeting. So one of the guys that sits on our strategic board, Edward Twiddy, is I think he must have shares in Swift bricks. He wants Swift bricks everywhere we can put them on the development. So we are very much aligned with that. I think the point that David's making here is this is any resistance to that in this particular building is purely driven by the government property agency as the occupier. Certainly, it's something that we are encouraging throughout the development.
Thank you. I wasn't so aware that Swifts were such a threat to national security. Obviously, they're Chinese Swifts or Russian Swifts.
I'm just going to jump in on that though, because there is in the report on page 21, 3.9, the comments from the ecology officer has raised some concerns about the, I think you've got some insect boxes and some other types of things to encourage, the sort of wildlife, as it were, but that they're in locations of high disturbance. So the ecology officer is saying in the report that they actually don't think that they'll be used. So they're kind of ticking a box, but not necessarily delivering the impacts. And I just wondered what conversations you've had about that. I appreciate the points that you're making in terms of the future user of the building and likewise the points about the wider site. But actually every development, we need to be making sure that we're maximising, the sort of positive impacts of them.
So we have challenged this with Atkins in terms of like a similar sort of point to you in terms of providing them on the facade and whether we can provide them on the roof area. But because of the plant space and the temperature that I'm a planning consultant, but I've only been advised, but the temperature of some of those plant areas, it's not suitable for bird boxes or bat boxes to be in those locations. So the answer is that it's going to be difficult to put them on that area. Within Cinder Snicket, which is the east-west route through the development, we will want to provide them in there, but the lighting that's required there to meet CYC requirements may mean that we can't provide the bat boxes in there or bird boxes. But on the outline planning permission, there's condition 30 or 31 that requires biodiversity enhancement management plan. So it requires any reserved matters coming forward to provide bird, bat, bee boxes, insect hotels where appropriate. We're delivering them on Museum Square. I don't know the detail of the NRM, but I'm assuming they are delivering them. We've got future phases that the development partners will be bringing forward in terms of Central Park and all of the benefits in that area. So there are other areas within York Central that these can be delivered, and that's what's sort of set out in the condition that your planning officers have set out in terms of whether they can provide in the red line area or outside of that as part of other reserved matters potentially.
Okay, thank you. I have Councillor Melly next.
Thank you, Chair. The report says that this development would be expected to create about 2,600 full-time equivalent jobs. Would they all be on site with potentially 2,600 people being in the building at one time during office hours, or is that the total number of jobs which could include either partly or completely working from home?
On site it'd be 1,300, about 1,100 to 1,300 employed by this building. Is expected to be up to 2,600.
So in terms of, when we're assessing the potential benefits to York's economy, we're looking at 1,300 jobs.
No, you're employing 2,600 people, of which 1,300 will be on site at any given time.
And the others could be they could be anywhere in the country.
Anywhere in the country, but they could be in the region as well. They could be in the city.
Thank you. So in terms of then, I appreciate you haven't got a detailed travel plan fully signed off, but that would mean, sorry, I'll do my maths based on those numbers, maybe less than 15 to 20% of people arriving by cycle, 1%-ish arriving by vehicle with a blue badge, and then the vast percentage of people either doing their entire journey on foot or arriving by bus. Does that roughly fit with what you think the travel planning will be?
I've got information to hand here. So overall, we believe that 20% will arrive by public transport, direct, as a full end-to-end journey. 1%, minimal numbers by taxi and motorcycle, 5% by drive to the site, which equates to 14 vehicles and 12 vehicles in the respective PM peaks. Relating to the transfer of people from cars to park and ride and to potential other car parking sites, 28%. And then overall, 12% cycle and 28% on foot.
No, sorry, just trying to get those numbers down. So of there being 1,000, about roughly, you know, estimates, 1,300 people on site at any one time, you expect about 14 of them to arrive by vehicle.
Yes, we expect about 14 and 12 in the respective PM peak to arrive at peak hours that are on-site generated specifically. Bearing in mind we have 16 blue badge spaces and there are some interim parking across the site. The remainder will transfer, which is the 28%, to park and ride or to other car parking sites throughout the city.
And sorry, I didn't get all the numbers, but in terms of how many people you expect to cycle to the site, there's 230 cycle spaces provided. Is that more than the number that you expect, just in case more cycle than?
Yeah, we expect 12% to arrive by cycle, which is lower than the 230 number, which is up to a maximum of 250.
Yeah, so it's 250 as part of the stones, 230 secure, which is basically in the building. We've got 20. If you see the 8 blue badge spaces within plot F1B, to the right of there, you've got 10 short stay cycle space, well, 20, but 10 Sheffield hoops there. So 250 as part of this development. LTM 120 guidance in terms of the floor space that's developed from this, I think it's down at about 120 LTM 120 guidance required. So we're providing double that. It's 230 or 250, include the short stay ones. You've got the cycle hub that's required to be delivered prior to this building being occupied. Condition 44 on the outline. That requires a minimum of 300 long stay cycle spaces to be provided, and that will be, I think the master plan talks about that being basically to the east of here between this building and the western entrance to this train station. So there's 300 there, and you've got other short stay spaces delivered as part of IP, the original, the road reserve matters, and more delivered as part of Museum Square, and it's supported by Highways Officer and Active Travel England. That number. Yeah.
Just before you do though, I'm just going to come in with my own just to clarify the numbers that you just said there. So did I hear you right? You said you expect 5% of people to drive to the site.
Drive, so yeah, on site.
So presumably that would be your blue badge holders.
Yes, that's right.
But 5% of 1,300 is 65, and you've got 16.
But not all arrive at the same. Arrive at the same time.
But you said on any given day you'd expect around between 1,100 and 1,300 people to be on site.
Yeah.
And 5% of those people would drive to the site. So they wouldn't be working a full day, or I'm not quite sure how the numbers work.
This is predicated, and this is where there's a confusion between the OPA and the numbers presented as people on site anytime. So previously, it was generated based upon the gross floor area, and the floor area on the parameters assessed in the OPA calculated in that respect, which generated approximate 100 vehicular trips in each peak. With the 5% reduction, well, the 5% now being car drivers, that results in 14 and 12 respectively in the PM peak periods. That doesn't necessarily translate to the number of employees on site at any one time, but you would expect daily fluctuation in travel mode.
I suppose what I'm getting at is I've just got a concern that you've got a great, lots of people coming to work in York. That's fantastic. The working age population is about, I think 1 in 4 people have some form of disability. Not all of those are going to have a blue badge, of course not, but I'd be very surprised if it's as low as 1% have a blue badge, and yet that's what the number of parking bays is being provided. And I appreciate what you're saying about people not all being on site all the time, but if you've got 1,300 people expected to be on site at any given time, I'm struggling to understand how that difference between the sort of I don't know what it would be, 4 or 5% perhaps that might have a blue badge.
In terms of blue badge space requirements, we're sort of moving off sort of the parking or the trips. It's down to blue badge spaces. Local planning policy requires, on the basis of 20,000 square meters, which this building is 5.5 blue badge spaces as part of this development. National guidance also requires 5.5%. The end occupier, GPA, have advised that they only actually need 2 spaces. Now, in 3 years' time, that might change, but as it currently stands right now, they only need 2 spaces. What we are providing as part of this development is 16. So significantly more than the end user requirement, significantly more than the local planning policy requirement, and significantly more than the national requirement. So we are basically over providing in terms of 16 spaces as part of this development.
Okay, I will digest that, and I'll go back to Councillor Melly, who had a supplementary, and then yeah.
Yeah, I think it's my last supplementary. Thank you, Chair. When we have the opportunity to ask questions to officers, I'll ask more about what our CYC access officer has been consulted on in terms of these plans. We know that he's looked at the highway aspects, but I'm just not sure about the other aspects. Have you had an access officer look at things like it says that some accessible cycle parking space will be included and that sort of thing?
Yeah,
looking at whether they are genuinely
Atkins have got don't know exactly what his title is, but an accessibility officer consultant that we've been talking to about a lot of the comments that have come in, for example, tactile paving, for example, the adaptable or truly accessible cycles spaces, that we've got a minimum of 10 within the building. So 10 long stays a minimum, but there is a condition on the reserve matters that states that the design, layout, quantum mix of those cycle storage spaces will be agreed at a later point. So 10 is the minimum. That could change if necessary, but obviously if you increase the number of truly accessible spaces, that takes up the space for the 2-tier bikes or whatever. So that's why we said that we can provide 230 quite easily in various different guises within the building. But we will make sure we're committed to a minimum of 10 within the building. Then we've also got within the short stay one, so to the right of the plot, those 8 on plot F1B, 4 of those Sheffield style hoops are wider, so they can be used as truly accessible spaces as well. So there's 8 there.
Just wider or longer as well?
I think they can be longer. They can be wider and longer. Well, they are wider in terms of spacing, but they can easily be longer as well if necessary. The detail of that can be agreed through the condition 24, which is the hard and soft landscaping condition.
It is a combination of the two. If you can see on the plan that's on the screen, they're both longer and wider, with hatch markings to provide sufficient width for a disabled user to exit a vehicle.
Difficult eyesight, but yeah, they
and coming back to a point from the previous speaker, yeah, that we are, when it comes to tactile paving, we'll be looking at the guidance provided by DFT, but when looking at the overall development in consultation with various officers, we've also considered DFT's design guidance, which is looking at wider public realm of inclusive mobility.
In terms of engagement with your access officer, we engaged with him for about 3 or 4 months ago on this application. We engaged with him on a number of other York Central related matters as well, taken on board his comments, and as Becky alluded to, or Louise alluded to, that your highways officer comments within the report have taken on board his comments as well, with matters that aren't necessarily addressed at this stage. For example, tactiles can be addressed through the discharge of condition 24, which is fairly standard because it's quite detailed stuff that you don't necessarily deal with at reserve matters or full planning permission stage.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Stewart next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's not the biggest issue, this, but obviously there's a comment in here about it's a government building, not shouting that it's a government building. And I'm sure the commenter means in terms of the government in it rather than the government in essence owning it. So I appreciate we're not sort of 200 years ago when obviously somebody would say, build me a Foreign and Commonwealth office or something like that for 300 people, build me a HM Treasury for 300 people. But I'm sure you can see, one sort of think about one extreme where these buildings were very, very grand and they shouted that they were the government. And I appreciate that's not, the norm now, not common now. I'm thinking of other DEFRA building in York, for example, that we've got at the moment. But in terms of it sort of saying it's a government building, at what state, and also I appreciate the fact that it's not a distinct absolute department, it is sort of, as I understand, part of the government will move in and everything like that. Are the plans to sort of make it, a bit more grand at the on sort of signage? It's not signage. I don't mean that, but do you see? Don't understand the sort of question I'm trying to ask? I'm maybe not phrasing it brilliantly.
So the government property agency have been sort of instructed to build a development on this site because there's a requirement for it. They have had discussions with end occupiers or end tenants. Unfortunately, we can't announce that yet, but I'm sure they would love to, at the right point, announce it and shout about it being a government and specifically which areas of the government will be within this building. It's a massive sell for York Central. It's a massive sell for York. It's brilliant. They are an anchor tenant for this development. That will be shouted about. In terms of the design, there probably are things they could do in terms of the signage, like you say, but I know David's behind me, but the design of it is taken on board the history of York in terms of the civic, the industrial, and from his perspective, he feels that they've designed a scheme that complements it, but also brings it to the 21st century as well.
The occupier also has a design guide, which the architect's got to work to. So, they're operating within that government. It's a government hub building and there's a design guide for that.
That's fine. I'm grateful for that. And I suppose if, for example, we were letting this to a large bank called HSBC, we know what will be going on for massive letters HSBC and not a great deal more and those sorts of things. And if we were letting it to other occupiers, we just have a sort of, stick a little sign on, but it's just that government. And so hopefully you're potentially saying that when, we know exactly who will be in, there could be something more, on that looks a bit, clear and everything like that. Would that be desirable rather than it just being an anonymous, these are the, if you go, for example, to Wellington Place in Leeds, for example, you just got a block of, building, another block of building, you go in and you've got floor 1, this floor 2, this floor 3, something like that. Very modern, very good. But I'm just sort of thinking hopefully this will be better and as per the comment in it, a chance to shout it more.
I think, Councillor Stewart,
do you agree? Yeah,
we're probably in the realm of we're looking at the application that's before us. There may be things that over time it develops and is amended, but I think in terms of the material decisions today, I'm going to move us on to Councillor Jane Burton next on my list.
Hey, sorry, so a bit back to disabled blue badge parking. And I noticed that you've got the 16 spaces and I actually thought that was quite a good thing because generally, I know that 25% of the population have a disability or are disabled, but I think about 10% of employees overall. And I do know that government are very good employers of disabled people generally. In my other work, then we encourage people to apply to government because they have very progressive policies to employing disabled people. So I was just, I don't know whether this comes in the remit as this is my first planning committee, but you're looking in 12 months to see if those spaces have been used. And I wondered if it could be extended because as the population also grows older and what as well, so that's a bit rambling, but what are you going to do with the spaces if you took some away as well? Is there any harm to keep them there?
So plot F1B is that bit that includes where the blue badge spaces are now is a development plot in the future. So the aspirations of the development partner is to put a development plot on that area, but obviously they can't unless they can justify through that condition that those aren't required. But as I said before, that the the end occupier, the government property agency, have been advised that they only actually need 2 spaces now. Local
Yes.
policy, so if this was a speculative building
Mhm.
for 20,000 square meters, you'd look at local policy
Mm.
and national guidance, and both of them are saying 5.5 spaces, so 6 spaces. So we're providing
Yeah.
16,
Yeah.
which is more. There is also condition 48 on the outline planning permission that requires a site-wide parking strategy to be agreed with the council prior to use of the development.
Mm.
So that still is in motion. It's being drafted by the development partner in consultation with CYC, and that will provide a strategy around parking, of which one of the things will be blue badge spaces.
And that's a key point about, going back to the earlier question about just revisiting the transport strategy for the overall scheme. If you have 2,000, if you have a multi-storey car park for 2,000 cars, you're encouraging people for car use, and you would need far more blue badge spaces. What we're trying to do here is review the way that the car interacts with the development, but also be conscious that some people have no other alternative. If you're disabled, you've got to get there by car.
Exactly.
Hence why we put more into this first application. We'll then monitor that to see if they are being used. We're also in a very fortunate position that even if we monitor this and they're not used, and we take those spaces out and develop on them, this is a relatively small piece of a huge development. So it's not like we do this and that's the end. We can adapt the car parking to suit the occupiers.
No, it's just that it was music to my ears that all your 16 spaces were going to be within 50 meters, because, I arrived at the same time as Councillor Stewart tonight. He was here a lot sooner than I was. And and also there's only 5 spaces in this building, and it's quite a scramble to get one.
Stipulation of it, making sure that they were within 50 meters of an entrance. And there was some isochrome showed before that showed that we were within 50 meters of the main entrance.
Yeah.
Or one of the secondary entrances.
Yeah.
So it was one of the big things we made sure.
We just like to avoid going around the back, because it can be very, I get that you're still thinking about disabled people, but it's very nice to go through the front door too.
And all of these are really in the front door.
I know, and I appreciate that, and I was pleased.
Yeah.
I find it incredible that 2 spaces is adequate, but I realise that that's what's written. That maybe needs looking at, but.
I've got a supplementary from Councillor Eyre, and was yours a supplementary as well, Councillor Stewart? So I'll go to Councillor Eyre first.
Thank you, Chair. And I take Councillor Burton's points about the government being good, but 2 employees out of 2,300 does seem slightly problematic if that's the figures we're being given. My alarm bells ringing from what you said there are, is there a risk that if plots F1B, F2 on both sides want to develop to the very borders of their plots, they will seek to use those 16 disabled bays as meeting their particular requirements? So there's a potential we could go from 16 for this site to actually only having 16 for 3 different sites.
So plot F2, the location of the 8 disabled spaces to the left, which we call the yard, that's fixed. They're set as they are where they are. They don't impact on the delivery of development of plot F2, whether the bottom one or the top one. It's been designed to ensure that they don't.
But what I'm saying is, if we agreed that there's 16 spaces for plot F1A, if when F2 comes with planning and planning say you need to provide 4 spaces, they will either have to provide 4 spaces within the F2 lines, or they come to you and say, have you managed to, can we use 4 of yours?
That'll be subject to a separate planning application. It will come to committee or with officers to determine the acceptability of that application.
We would need to provide the appropriate car parking for that as a total.
But my question is, if your review comes to the conclusion that you have, as you're sort of suggesting here, 14 spaces more than you require, would you be happy to hand those over to alternate plots?
No, as it's spelled out today, we've worked through with the accessibility officer at City of York. We've looked at statistics around population of working age with a disability and calculated a figure that is acceptable. In standard guidance terms, that's significantly above where that needs to be, which would typically be 5 spaces for a building of this size. What we're proposing here is that the 8, which is 50% more than is standard required, will be full-time provision. Monitoring will only occur on the 8 that are located in plot F1B.
So you would be happy with the condition, say, that put that number of spaces in perpetuity with no use by any other buildings on site? That's the condition, yeah.
Okay, and Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is sort of a would you agree question, and just to get that in advance. But it's on the number of blue badge spaces. I appreciate entirely the whole, national average of this, local average of that, guidance, everything like that. What I don't really understand here is the relevance of the end user says they'll only need 2 spaces. And so from my point of view, I'm literally dismissing that information, because I can understand why an end user would say, we need more, it's not enough. We're going to be doing particular use, therefore have lots of people that are disabled coming to our site. But I don't really see how the government can, or the end user can sort of say, 2 will do it for us, because from my point of view, they're either massively limiting the number of disabled people that will be coming, or they are knowing for a fact that all their future employees will not have any accidents or will not have anything like that. And so I think that's something of a red herring, that end user saying 2. I think everything you sort of said on disability provision is broadly positive, and all the national averages and beating those is positive. And I'm sort of seeing that, what the end user has said is of 2 is a red herring, because if an end user said, well, we just don't get disabled people, it's not our business, it's not the way we'll actually be fine with 0, I'm sure the committee would dismiss it out of hand.
And we challenged that too very early on, and we said to them, look, there's the local planning guidance policy, and the national guidance that says for a development of this scale, if it was speculative, it's 5.5. So we pushed that on the number. They went back to the expected end occupiers, and because we've got an end user, which there are massive positives, in fact, that we've got a scheme that's going to be delivered because we've got an end occupier. They said that there was only a requirement for 2. We challenged that again in terms of local policy and actually what we should be doing, and that's why we've got 16 now, of which 16 are delivered on day 1, 16 are for just this building, and 8 are effectively in perpetuity.
And I think the other point about that is.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in at that, because I've just been having a little look at the condition that's in the report. So it's page 67, condition 6, which is referring to that review. And I just want to be very, very clear, because there's the 2 different effectively 2 different sites for the blue badge parking. So what you're saying is that the review that is being set out in the condition is just of the 8 that are in F1B
in the middle,
and the other ones that are in the area that you're calling the yard are just there in perpetuity.
Right.
So I think if you're happy, I'm going to suggest that the committee that we just slightly tighten that wording of that condition, just to reflect what you're saying there about the ones to be retained in perpetuity, the review specifically on the ones that are in F1B.
Yeah.
And then I think hopefully that kind of allies some of the concerns that are being expressed in terms of, what the future might be for those. So if we can just note that one for when we come forward. Sorry, I did cut you off there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything further, but yeah. Okay, so I had Councillor Fenton. Is this supplementary to what we've been talking about? So it's a new. So Councillor Eyre had you down for a question which was different than what we've already been discussing. Okay.
Apologies for saying I'm going to ask a question and keep jumping into other things, but I wasn't going to ask this one, but I was going to give Councillor Melly the credit because I hadn't spotted it until she mentioned it. It was about that earlier point in terms of the cycle access. If we could get that particular cycle plan, because we don't have the cycle plan drawing in our papers either. In the cycle routes, well, unless I'm losing it. The point was made earlier on that people are quite clearly going to access bicycle through that particular area. It was made worse as you presented because you then said that you're putting the Sheffield Steel cycle things to the right of the blue badge parking, which is one of the first things people will see as they're approaching. So outside the front door, and everything. So why are you not putting the cycle route where people are actually going to cycle to?
Why the cycle store is used?
No, nobody from town is going to cycle all the way around the building to get to the front when they can see the front from where they are. They're going to continue straight on to the front from the end of the cycle lane. I think if you zoom in, the cycle lane seems to come to a dead end around about the bus stop at the front of the building.
Yeah.
So 98% of people, to me, are going to cycle to that point and go, there's the door. This sign's telling me to cycle all the way around the building and come back to that point there. I'm just going to go to there. Either responsibly, I will get off my bike and push it through that bit, or more realistically, some people are just going to cycle straight through it. People with access issues are not going to be able to cycle through it. They're going to have to be forced all the way around, because I'm guessing the width isn't. So why on earth is that cycle lane not going to where the entrance is?
So to pick up on what Councillor Whitcroft, I think, mentioned earlier about, Councillor Burton, about active frontages. We wanted to create the active frontages along Hudson Boulevard. If we put the cycle storage on the other side, so on Hudson Boulevard, that loses that active frontage. It's a really important element, that Hudson Boulevard, the active frontage. The retail unit on the eastern side is also an active frontage. So to locate the cycle storage in any other location, whether that is along Cinder Snicket or Hudson Lane, that is effectively, that ensures that we've got that active frontage. To set out to the cyclists that use the government hub, that when people are employed as part of this building, they will be given a pack of information, and within that it will make clear to them that cyclists should take the route that we're showing on those orange lines to get to the cycle storage. Now, we can't stop people from doing what they want to do, but what we can do is advise them that this is the route that you should be doing, that is safe and best for everyone around, and that's the approach that we're going to take. Now,
that only works for visitors anyway. But that only works for visitors, for employees who are actually based at the site. Visitors wouldn't have had that pack telling them. But Designland is one of my absolute passions. No matter how much pieces of paper you put on asking people to do that. So the question was, I mean, it's that glaring gap on that line there is the route that everyone's going to take. What is the reason for not letting them use that route?
Well, because of the location of some trees that we've got, would it not conflict with the cyclist coming off there? You've got the bus stop there, you've got the bus. We feel that this is the best route for a cyclist to go through. Now, the Highways Department have also raised this as a comment, and I don't know whether you'll ask them later maybe, but they've talked about dealing with this through the condition 24, so the materiality of that hard surfacing area, which we can do, but from our perspective, we feel like this isn't probably the best one because this isn't from the city centre. This is from the western entrance to the train station, but it shows the route that a cyclist should take and ensure that they use the 2-lane cycle route along Hudson Boulevard.
And I think for clarity, I agree that probably is the safest.
I think
but that doesn't. People don't always follow the safest, and that's something to be aware.
Onto your point though about that particular route coming from the station entrance, I think that commuters who are coming into that building by train will be coming through the station across. They're not at ground level, so they're not on their bikes. They'll be coming out of the station down to get down to ground level in the station building. They won't be riding a bike. So I would imagine that if you were getting off the train to go to put your bike in that cycle slot in that building, you would just walk across there. I think that the line that shows on there is the route if you are cycling, i.e. moving on a bike. I think if you're coming from the railway station exit with a bike, you just walk across there.
I think I'll just for clarity, because I've just checked with the officers, those routes that are marked are segregated cycle routes. So whilst I totally agree in the sense that people generally follow their desire line, I think sometimes people also just follow the line that they're on. If they're on a segregated route, it possibly takes them. But that ultimately is a thing for us to determine in terms of how material do we think it is, how much of an impact do we think it has on the overall scheme. Councillor Fisher, I think you had a supplementary that was just on this as well.
Yeah, I share Councillor Eyre's views on that. I also note in paragraph 548 that particular Cinder Snicket is not LTN 120 compliant, and it gets around that by saying it should have sufficient width given the very low level of pedestrian and cycle usage envisaged. Have you given thought to some kind of physical barrier to stop people using that route? Because I'll tell you straight, I used to cycle 200 miles a week, and if I was cycling to work in that building, I would take the route that Councillor Ayres suggested without a second thought.
Yeah, so Cinder Snicket is a, I don't know whether you can zoom in. You've got on the building side, you've got a, let me just double check the width. It's 7.4 meters in width. On the building side, so when I say building, I mean our proposed building, it's 2.5 meters wide, and LTM 120 guidance states 3 meters. The centre landscape strip is 3 meters, and then the southern bit is 2 meters. Now, if you're at one end of Cinder Snicket, you have, it's 45 meters long, Cinder Snicket, but this landscape bit has breaks. So you have a choice, either whether you're at the start of Cinder Snicket to go down the northern bit, which is 2.5 meters, or the southern side, which is 2 meters. And even if you're halfway along there, you've also got a point to cut through because the landscape isn't a continuous strip. Now, if we made that 3 meters, then that affects the width of the southern bit and or affects the development plot for plot F1B. So 7.4 meters in total, of which 2.5 in the northern and 2 meters on the southern, although not is LTM 120, which is guidance, is acceptable. We think it's acceptable for the use of this Cinder Snicket. It's not going to be as used as Hudson Boulevard, which is the I was going to say road, but the boulevard is along the northern side of the building, which will be more used by public, by either cyclists or pedestrians.
Restrict any conflict by making one side of Cinder Snicket for pedestrians only and the side for cyclists only, then you've got no conflict and the width doesn't matter.
If that can be done, and we can detail that through condition 24, we could potentially do that. We can talk to the highways team about that. The only thing the Cinder Snicket is not proposed to be, I know there was a question earlier about adoption. The proposal is Cinder Snicket and Hudson Lane will be private. They will not be adopted highways.
Okay, I had Councillor Melly next.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to come back to tactile paving, because I have attended at least one consultation event for, as part of every consultation period on this application and the previous application on the public realm. And at those events, online and in person, there were various, there weren't detailed designs yet, but there were various pictures for kind of design, style and inspiration and that sort of thing. And grey paving, tactile paving was included in those consultation events. And at the time, I asked whether tactile paving was going to be grey or whether it was going to be colour coded. And I was told absolutely the tactile paving would be colour coded, that those pictures of grey tactile paving were just for kind of paving slab kind of style and, design inspiration notes. So that commitment was made, I don't know, it might have been a year and a half ago or something, the tactile paving would be colour coded. And since then, we've had reserve matters application for an adjoining site for the new public realm, in which this committee had a discussion about the importance of colour coded tactile paving. And we decided that application was only acceptable if it was conditioned to have the colour coded tactile paving. So I would like to understand more about why that commitment has been dropped and why now it's being left to kind of, future.
I'm just going to jump in there actually, because I've sought clarification with officers, and my understanding is that the tactile paving hasn't been determined yet in terms of colour. So there's no specification as to what colour the tactile paving currently is.
There was a commitment in the past, which has now been dropped and isn't part of this application. So we've heard that it's important for access issues. I would like to hear from the applicant whether that's because they feel it's difficult to include or not appropriate for this.
I'm happy for the applicants to answer, but I just want to be really clear, because I appreciate that there's been some comments made both by a member of the public and some concerns raised quite rightly, because it's really important that we get this right. But my understanding is that in this particular application, where there's one specified part of tactile paving and a potential request for another, that part is being covered by the condition discharge on the outline application, and actually no discussion has taken place yet as to what colour those tactile pavings would be, because it's covered by the outline condition rather than the reserve matters application, if that makes sense. But
there's nothing more to add apart from your comments are taken on board with the team, and we're working through with the officers at the council, access officer, Harry's office, to make sure the materials meet the requirements of the needs of the officers, basically, and through the discharge of condition 24.
Is that supplementary, Councillor Stewart? On you go.
Presumably though, we can harden the detail, can't we, at this stage? If it's been agreed at outline and it's meandering through a process of looking at these, the tactile paving and the colours, presumably we can harden it. I suppose the question I'd have to the applicant potentially is are you happy for it to continue to be looked at with a condition, or would you be not unhappy if it went further and, for example, this committee was to condition particular colours?
I don't think in the specifics, because I've had a little bit of a discussion because I thought we might end up in some of this. I think what we need to do is get the advice from officers around the way in which the reserve matters conditions interact with the outline matters conditions, plus then the DFT guidance around tactile paving, which is a different thing to planning. I think it's probably welcome if the applicant are willing to continue to have those conversations to ensure that we're meeting as high a threshold as we can in terms of accessibility. But I think we will need to just take some advice in terms of what's reasonable for this committee to condition, in addition to anything that's already in place, if that makes sense. But I don't think that's something that the applicant can speculate on, I suppose, is where I'm getting to.
Yeah, absolutely fine. I suppose my thought is just if the committee is mindful that we do need to see the colours of tactile paving, and if, for example, the applicant's entirely open to that, we don't want to then potentially see that getting lost in a darkened room when these things are sorted out between officers and applicants and everything like that.
And in that context, I'm happy for you to give us a response. But as I say, I think we should go to officers when we get to questions on officers, just about what's reasonable or otherwise.
We're happy to work with officers throughout the process, like we are with the infrastructure works.
Okay, thank you. I have one further question, which was from Councillor Fenton, which I'll go to. Councillor Jane Burton, was that a question that was related to this discussion we've just had? Okay, Councillor Fenton, if you can just hang fire for 1 minute. Councillor Jane Burton.
I'm just a little bit worried that, because I agree with Councillor Stewart, our position on this. I know it's a small amount of pavement, and but it's very important for people with visual impairments. And there seems to have been a bit of disagreement, perhaps, to get to this stage that we're at with the report from what we can read and the submission, so that I do think it might be rather good if we gave some guidance, if that's what we're allowed to do.
When we finish the public participation section, my intention is that we take a short adjournment, and then we'll come to asking questions of officers. You'll be able to ask the officers what discussions have taken place, who's been involved in those discussions, and also their advice on what is and isn't appropriate to condition and all of that sort of thing. So this is information gathering.
Okay. It's just I heard you say that we should count on the officers, and whilst I agree that they have a great deal of experience and expertise, that disabled people often have, it's nothing about us without us, and just bearing that in mind, really.
Without a doubt.
Yes.
We are, however, working within a planning legislative framework, and we have to meet various tests of reasonableness and other such things. So, as I say, we'll come to the opportunity to explore that from the officer's perspective. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a final question on car parking. The officer report refers to concerns that they had around a default position being that visitors and staff would be directed towards city centre car parks. I hear what you said around prioritising park and ride as the if people want to travel by car, then that's the route they should take. you mentioned you're having conversations with officers about a site-wide parking strategy. City centre parking is a live debate in York. So through those conversations, will you be able to pick up some of the concerns the highways officers set out in the report around a potential assumption that city centre parking will be available, which may not prove to be the case?
Sorry, was the question, will we take that into account?
Is it something you're discussing with officers as part of the
Yes,
site-wide
sorry.
parking strategy discussions that you said were taking place?
That is exactly what we'd be doing, yeah. And just from my own experience, I mean, I'm not from York. I travel in 2 or 3 times a week usually by car, or I did when we first started the project. Just from my own personal experience, sometimes I come to a meeting in York and you can't get parked already. You know, so I've been here, particularly when the racing's on, and you can't get a car parking space. So I've started to use Park and Ride, and I've also started to use train into York now. So for my own personal experience, I think if we were to build 2,000 car parking spaces at York Central, I'm sure there would be full. What we don't want to do now is to set the precedent that we're going to be encouraging cars into this development. We want to do exactly the opposite. And so I think York and York Central in particular lends itself to being a car-free environment. We understand, however, that there are people who can only travel by car, and we need to accommodate that. That's kind of our position. We are in discussions with the local authority, who seem to agree, but we've got to work through that car parking strategy to make sure that everybody is satisfied by it. But we don't have the answer to it yet, but the general direction of travel is that.
Okay, I'm going to draw a line there on questions. You've had a good old grilling. So thank you very much for your time this evening. If you could take your seats back in the gallery, and obviously, stay and watch as we move on through the meeting. I think with the time being a little after 6, I'm going to just suggest we take a short adjournment now until 6:15. And if I can just remind everybody, committee members, no discussions about the application, and if members of the public, please don't try to speak to any committee members about anything during the adjournment. So I'll see you back at 15:15. Okay, welcome back everybody to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee A, and we are continuing to go through agenda item 4A, which is the reserved matters application for plot F1A on the York Central site. We're now into the questions from members to officers. I'm just going to use my chair's privilege to just ask a couple of quick questions, because I think it's really important in terms of the conversation that we've had to date. So first of all, if we could just set out the discussions that have been had to date with the access officer in relation to highways and the tactile pavings, and also if we could just be clear about the relationship between the conditions that exist on the outline application versus any reserved matters application, and how that relates to the tactile paving and those aspects.
Okay, so for clarity, the discussions that have been had so far with the access officer in terms of tactile paving don't relate to this planning application. They relate to the infrastructure planning application that was approved 2 years ago, maybe more, I can't remember off the top of my head. 2020 it was approved. So they are solely in relation to that phase of the development. That's where the discussions have been around the tactile paving. I think this is where the confusion is at this moment in time, because there has been some discussion over the most appropriate type, material, colour, and they are still ongoing. We are working with the developer, we're working with the access officer. There's been nothing agreed either way. We are trying, we will get to a solution in terms of that. In terms of this application, we haven't discussed any form of tactile paving with the access officer at this point yet, because we're not at that point. There's no approval to then discharge the condition to it. So that would be remiss of us to start discharging conditions before you've got an approval. That doesn't happen. So what we will do, if this gets approved, we will then look at discharging the condition and the information required. So conversely, condition 24 of the original outline permission, it's a very long condition. It talks about all sorts of landscaping, but as part of that, it does include materials for such things as pavements. So this will be covered as part of that, and we will continue to work with the access officer. So there's been no agreement, there's been no one colour, other colour. It is just continually working with the developer to ensure that we get the right material for each phase of the development, because it depends, the colours, as the first speaker said, depend on what the crossing is. And I'm going to look at Tony to explain that in terms of colours, because that's his speciality. But there is confusion. We have not discussed tactile paving with the access officer because it relates to a discharge of condition. You can't discharge a condition until you've got an approval, which you haven't got yet. Okay, I'm just going to get Tony to explain.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to add any more, and then I'm going to ask you a supplementary.
Okay.
Yeah, just quickly on the colour side for the tactile paving, there is a very specific colour for control crossings like signals and zebra crossings, which would be a red colour, and that can be specified. For other crossings, they are usually buff, but other colours can be used as long as they've got sufficient contrast. And there was a concern that the contrast which we were achieving with the buff tactiles relative to the adjacent paving in the area wasn't adequate, but we can progress the buff tactile approach.
So just in terms of some of the points that were raised then, the conditions as set, being that they're at the outline, they, I would assume, will allow a consistency of approach across the whole site, and that is the aspiration of the planning authority, and presumably the developer as well. And in terms of the robustness of that condition that sits across the whole site, you're satisfied that there's sufficient opportunity within that discharge of that condition to ensure that there's appropriate tactile paving to all of the appropriate guidance with contrast, all of the things that have been mentioned. You have the tools to be able to make sure that that happens consistently throughout the whole of this site.
in a short answer, yes, we are satisfied. Condition 24 obviously is there for a reason, so we do ensure that there is consistency throughout. So yes, it will be covered by that.
Thank you. And a final question then, because obviously, as well as the public speaker, we had in the update document some contact from members of the York Access Forum. Is there an ongoing conversation involving people like the York Access Forum to ensure that when this is built out and developed, it is built out with the voices of people with lived experience contributing and being listened to in terms of the way that this is done?
Absolutely. With the infrastructure works, which we are discussing materials as we speak, we have had site meetings that have involved David Smith, our own access officer, and he's having discussions in turn with the appropriate access groups that he's involved with. So he's feeding back from them to us to make sure that we get an appropriate end result, basically.
Okay, thank you. So I saw Councillor Jane Burton's hand. Was this a supplementary on the question that I'm asking?
I suppose I was just going to ask more or less that last question that you asked, that if you're satisfied but our disabled representative groups, DPOs, happy with what you're satisfied with, because I think that's important too. Yeah. But I think from what you've said, you are, so
thank you.
It's a good
guarantee. Is that also supplementary on this? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for explaining all that. I was just wondering, do officers have the wording of the condition that was added to the Public Realm Reserve Matters application? Because the committee agreed that we would add a condition about the colour coding of the paving. And I appreciate, yeah, and how does that wording work with the colour contrast thing if there is going to be quite kind of yellow coloured paving and that leaving there not being much contrast?
I think the Museum Square application, which included an additional condition on it, related to the red tactiles, and the red tactiles relate to control crossings. There aren't any control crossings with this particular application.
It related, yeah, it did relate to some of the control crossings, which are pink, but it also related to some areas of possible pedestrian and cyclist conflict and denoting clearly which are pedestrianised areas. And I think there were some crossings where there was a pedestrian area crossing a cyclist area where it was non-controlled crossings and it was going to be the more kind of yellow tactile paving as well. My recollection, sorry, I haven't gone back and rewatched the video, but my recollection was that we also wanted to condition that tactile paving.
I don't think it specified a particular colour for the uncontrolled crossing, but we would follow the guidance, which includes buff tactiles. And I say that it's the contrast between the adjacent materials which has to be considered, because if you were using buff materials next to a buff tactile, there would be concerns there which would have to take into account in that approval process. But we would speak with the accessibility officer to make sure that was considered appropriately.
Can I just come in? Sorry, I have got the wording of that condition that was added at planning committee. So it does all the references just in relation to the red tactiles. So I mean, I can read the condition word for word just for clarity. No development shall commence until the detailed design of the highway and transport aspects of the development, covering all modes of transport, specifically including the following items, supported by a road safety audit, as being submitted and approved in writing. And that was A, the layout and surfacing detail, including red tactiles for the southern signalled crossing. B, layout and surfacing detail, including red tactiles for the northern signalised crossing. C, layout and surfacing detail, including colour and or texture contrast for the zebra crossing over the cycleway. D, layout and surfacing detail, including curbing delineation of the proposed cycle route. E, the delineation signing of the junction as the cycleway from Cinder Street diverts onto the square towards Hudson Boulevard. F, layout and extent of drop crossings, including plans showing that appropriate visibility displays can be achieved. G, details of the location and operation of AMPR at the access points. And H, layout and details of the road, train, access, egress, signalling and signing.
Okay. So I'm just going to invite any members with any questions. I'm going to go to Councillor Clark, and if you can just hold your hands, keep your hands up while I get eyeball it.
Thanks, Chair. Just page 20, 3.5, it says something about concerns over the current travel plan and section 106 funding not being adequate. I'm just wondering how that will impact on this particular development and whether it's related to some of the concerns that have been raised about car parking and things like that, and that if the infrastructure isn't there or isn't going to be funded, then you know what is the impact on this particular development that we foresee, please?
Yeah, there's a significant sum of funding that comes through from section 106, which came through from the outline planning application. That has a list of particular items about encouraging sustainable transport, physical measures and other measures such as travel plan officers, those types of things. The only issue here is that if there was a significant change in the approach at for the outline application, so the wider scheme, which moved away from the level of car parking that was proposed in that overall scheme, then that section 106 may need to be reviewed.
Supplementary, yeah.
Supplementary, is it? Can it be reviewed? I suppose is my second question to that.
I think that's more of a legal question or a planning question.
I mean, usually the section 106 is set out at outline stage and that would set out the funding, so no.
Just in addition to that then, because obviously there's the travel plan that has been sort of mentioned and discussed, and that bit I think is something that's an ongoing discussion. So are you satisfied that it's, you know, robust enough, ambitious enough? Have you got the tools to make sure that you are getting what we're asking for as a planning authority from the travel plan?
Yeah, the travel plan is conditioned, so we would work through to ensure that we get that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
One thing that Highways had raised in terms of the travel plan would be that we would want to see a robust full travel plan come forward to make sure that there is sufficient staff resourcing and budget put aside for you know, to meet the requirements of the plan. The outline travel plan that was submitted, highway officers had advised it was a little bit weak in terms of the resourcing that it was committing to, but we will work with the applicants to make sure that what does come in for discharge, you know, is strong enough in terms of the provision there.
Okay, I had Councillor Eyre next.
Thank you, Chair. For a quick question and then going back to cycling, I don't really want to take them both at once. So the quick one is on the EV charging. Appreciate on page 57, 5.108, that's a lot of progress. It says that the outline condition had 2 out of them being available for EV charging, which is what's shown on the plan. I know previously, well, we've not required people to provide EV charging on every particular site. We've tried to ensure that the infrastructure is in place to upgrade the rest of the parking spaces as necessary. Did we do that on that particular condition? And if not, is there anything we can do afterwards?
I'm just reading the condition back just to check the full wording. So basically it says that at least 2% of all on-street and commercial car parking shall be for the exclusive use of electric vehicles. And the approved facilities for electric vehicle charging points shall be provided prior to first occupation of any building within that phase. So that's the only bit that we've got in that outline condition. In relation to commercial, there's a bit.
Condition 52?
Yes.
Because the report specifically says it will be two. And with respect to encouraging low emission vehicles, 2 parking spaces on site would be provided with rapid electric charging.
Yes, there are 2 spaces shown on the plan. So we have got
There's
the
not-
2 spaces, the condition says 2%.
But we didn't say anything about making sure that it's just one of those things when while they're digging there and putting all the cables in.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do it all at once. Maybe
Yeah.
put that as informative.
And you had a second question? Yeah, go for it.
Just getting to the bottom of the cycling issues. So trying to clarify, because on one of the other, so that does say on there that the top area is pedestrian at the top of Hudson Lane. On that very tiny writing. Just to the left, the other way. So contrasting boundary block sets to define extent of pedestrian areas. So is that pedestrian or is that shared use on that whole section? The whole of Hudson Lane, basically, it doesn't.
Yeah, all purpose in the centre, so cyclists can go in that central area, the larger paving slabs that it's shown there, and pedestrians, it'll be pedestrian only with a curbed arrangement on either side.
And what's the width of that whole?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Boys, I don't know off the head the actual width of that, but in effect for the width for the it's a vehicular route, so it continues on through there to the end.
So it's actually a vehicle, cycle, and pedestrian. So there's pedestrian things either side of it, and the middle bit is shared use, cycle, and vehicles.
But it's only for servicing. That top end, it's servicing through and a service area to turn around through there.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. But so then the last bit of it was, so Cinder Snicket is not LTN 1T compliant. Is Hudson Lane fully LTN 1T compliant and Hudson Boulevard LTN 120 compliant?
I believe so, and that was something we would look at in the detail as well to make sure that the actual detailed layout complied with that.
And that's what's the final thing is there anything we can do at this stage to fix the desire line issue? Or are we stuck with that from outline? Because it will be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we did challenge that as officers and highway officers, you know, because that is the desire line. As we've set out in the report, you know, we have said that there are measures such as, you know, obviously the detail of the final layout of street furniture and bollards and things like that can change and be agreed through the discharge of conditions. So there could be signing, surfacing and other aspects of the hard landscaping that could be used to try and veer people away from using
So we
that
could
area.
add a condition.
To do what? To prevent people using?
I wouldn't want
To
to
do
prevent.
what?
I don't know. That's the, so the interventions we can have would only be to deter people. We can't actually make it more accessible.
That's not what's in front of you. You've got to consider. I'm going to go back to it again.
I always discuss it. Yeah, but so if in my personal view is I would refuse it on the basis of, I'm not saying that, but if that's my view, adding a condition to make it acceptable is something the committee can do.
This is a reserved matters application and you've got to consider it on the plans that are in front of you. You can't change. Well, we can't change the plans and this is the information that we've got in terms of the cycle route. Officers have said we'd prefer a different route, but the applicants have come back and said this is the one that works, this is the one that we think is acceptable. And that's where we are. We think that there are ways around it in terms of materials and such things going forward, but we can't change a plan in terms of a desire line. We can't change this cycle route because that's part of the information they've submitted as part of the application, or that one. That is the information and that's their intended route for cycles. You and I, we can't change that as part of this application.
I think Councillor Melly had a supplementary on this.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you'll think it's supplementary and not too much of a tangent, but while we're on this subject, could you just remind us, so that to the northeast of the site, that kind of circular design area, is that also a pedestrian area? I think when we, we're looking at the other reserved matters application, that was a pedestrian area where there was also going to be conflicts from having cyclists cross it. Yeah, thank you. So that is also a pedestrianised area. So in order to avoid having cyclists cross a pedestrianised area causing conflicts by travelling along a desire line, we're asking cyclists to cycle a very long way round and cross a pedestrianised area as well anyway.
Just to clarify on that, the cycle route across that circular area is will be delineated with different materials and potentially level differences as well, to ensure that it is clear that it's a cycle route. And then there's a specific crossing point right by the zebra crossing at that location.
So that, let me just scroll out because you can't see my pointer unless I'm scrolled out. So this here, sorry. That's your cycleway there. Where the application that you're considering is directing people. So that is your cycleway that was approved as part of your reserve matters for the NRM. No, sorry, the square.
So it crosses through a pedestrianised square, but along a delineated cycle route.
Yes, it is a delineated cycle route, not there.
Through a pedestrianised, otherwise pedestrianised area.
But that's already been approved.
Yeah, but just for understanding, when we're looking at this application and, thinking about the hierarchy of, we want it to be as car-free development as much as possible. And so therefore having good cycle routes, but not in a way that conflicts with pedestrians because they're higher up on the hierarchy than cyclists, just trying to figure out what the transport is a reserved matter. So just for the sake of understanding what the transport, cycling and pedestrian routes are around this development, that's all.
Yeah, that's your cycle route there that is then shown on which way to go. Yeah, see, that's your cycle route that goes in line with your previous reserve matters.
So that's supplementary, Councillor Stewart. Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. I don't know if Becky's sort of saying that there's nothing we can do on this, but my thought would be, and I haven't cycled 200 miles a week like Councillor Fisher ever, I'll confess, but if I was coming down the cycle route and getting to the sort of, problem point between where Councillor Eyre says in practice we'll go and in practice, compared to reality, and I agree with that. For me, there's an alternative thing that people will sort of think it's going to take me 12 seconds if I go on the route we're not meant to, and it's going to take me 25 seconds if I go on the route we are meant to go on, and therefore being a good cyclist and having read my pack, I will go on the route we're meant to. However, I will be determined to do it as fast as possible to save my 13 seconds, and therefore what I'm concerned about is the top left corner where the red dot literally was. Okay. And I'm concerned there about pedestrians doing their own thing, minding their own business, and cyclists coming around that corner. Is there anything we can do about that corner so that people are fully aware when they meander sort of upwards that they could be about to see a cyclist, and anything we can do to sort of open it out a bit so people are seeing the cyclist before there's any chance of them impacting with them quite literally? And my second question was going to be, do we think we've got too many words with too many streets we call after Hudson, and it causes all sorts of confusion, but that's not really a planning matter.
Just respond on that. That is something we will look at in the detailed design. The road safety audit will probably pick that up as well.
Thank you. And I think just on a general point, and this is in no way directed at you, Councillor Stewart, but I think we as a committee just need to be mindful of, we have officers who are specialists in particular areas, that as long as we've got the conditions to make sure that they have the tools available to them to do things like road safety audits and other things, we just need to know that those tools are in place, rather than necessarily the specifics of, is somebody pulling handbrake, turns around corners on their bike, or whatever they might be doing. Councillor Melly, I had you down on my list next. Had you got a different substantive question?
Thank you. Yes, it was a question about landscaping and ecology, because some sort of landscaping scheme has been submitted as part of this application, and the CYC ecologist has looked at that landscaping scheme and given opinion on the ecology based on that landscaping scheme. And then the landscape architect has said that actually, due to conflicts between drainage and trees, that landscaping scheme might not actually be viable. So then has the ecologist then been consulted again to see whether they have any objections based on, you know, this landscaping scheme possibly not being fully implemented, or?
So yeah, so the landscape officer did have concerns about the conflict with drainage, and we went back to the applicants on that. They're using the same strategy as they're using on Hudson Boulevard in terms of tree pits and drainage. So we're satisfied that, you know, we've already agreed the principles of that on Hudson Boulevard, so there'd be no reason to not follow the same principles on here. So we're satisfied that the trees could be accommodated as shown on this plan. She's happy with the species as well. There is some comments in there about the species, the plant species and things not quite aligning with the recommendations in the sustainability strategy and the ecology report. So that's why we have you know, we have agreed that we would detail the final species as part of the discharge of condition 24, which again is the landscape condition that was attached at outline stage. But yeah, we are satisfied that that issue with the drainage and trees has been resolved. Thank you.
Not a supplementary. Can you put my name back in the list for another question?
It's a new question.
Yeah.
In which case, I'm just going to invite any other members of the committee. I'll put you on my list, but if there's anybody else with any further questions, I think I had Councillor Culwick actually, didn't I? Yes, sorry, Councillor Culwick, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. An entirely different matter. I note in the representations recorded at 4 on agenda page 25D, there was concern about the homogeneous approach, leaving the bulk very apparent. I deliberately asked the question earlier about the scale, height, the bulk of the building. I wonder how far officers have explored that with the developer, whether in the process there have been any considerations around that, whether there is scope within the delivery and approval of materials. Is that a concern? I'd be really interested to hear comments on that. I think it's probably, in the scale of things, going to be rather more significant than some of the other details we've been discussing.
Yeah, I mean, officers have consulted with the council's conservation and sustainability manager, and he has provided quite detailed comments on the application. We are comfortable in terms of the bulk, the scale, the massing, the height. It all sits within the approved parameter plans. He has made some comments about the materials in terms of there isn't a roofscape to contrast the brickwork against, but he is satisfied that we have got conditions attached to outline stage again that deal with the specific material choice. So we will have the opportunity to review samples, you know, to make sure that there is an appropriate finish and appearance to the building. So yeah, it's covered by existing conditions.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I think that covers it at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Melly then.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my next question was about conditions, and every planning application we get, there's always various officers and statutory consultees who request various conditions to make, in their view, make the application acceptable, and then we, take that advice. And so usually I go through and look at every condition that's been requested and just check whether it has been included or not. But in this report, there was quite a few where it says, you know, conditions requested or conditions recommended, but then it's not specific about what. So I was just wondering if you could reassure us that those conditions have all been included, and if any of them haven't, explain why. So, for example, there's one, the design and sustainability team, they say they recommended some conditions. Have they been included? public protection requested a condition about lighting. And, you know, it being the same condition as was added to another reserve matters application for Central Hall, but it doesn't specify what that condition is. Waste Services wanted, well, it doesn't say a condition, but something about sweat path analysis and that sort of thing. Has all of that been included in the conditions?
Yes, they are all covered actually in the main body of the report. So I have gone through all of those and explained why. So the first one that you mentioned, which was the design and conservation managers' comments, that was to do with the boxing in of the outdoor seating area. So that's covered by the hard landscape condition 24 again, which we keep going back to, but it does cover a lot of the hard landscaping and soft landscaping details. The second one that you mentioned there in terms of public protection and lighting, they wanted a similar condition to one that we'd used at Central Hall, and that is included. Let me just find it. So yeah, that's condition 4, which it relates to the height, type, position and angle of the lighting. The one that you mentioned in relation to the waste team wasn't a condition. It was just to make sure that from a highways perspective, the refuse vehicles could manoeuvre. So we had all the tracking information provided as part of the application. So that was all covered as well. Okay.
So there weren't any applications that officers with various specialties requested that then planning officers felt actually in the balance weren't necessary. They're all in there.
They're all included. If there were any that hadn't been for some reason, then I would have included that in the report.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions, Councillor Eyre?
Just a very, very quick one, Chair. I forgot earlier from Councillor Stewart's comments about the visibility of the building. I know at the previous application, we had that fantastic terminology of plop art. Is there any plop art that would be envisaged to be around this that could perhaps address Councillor Stewart's concerns about the visibility and prominence of the building?
There's no specific proposals referenced in terms of public art, but again, condition 24 does cover public art as well. So it would be part of the discharge of condition 24 that public art be considered for use on the building. Also, they would have to go through a separate process for if they wanted to put, you know, advertisements and things for the coffee shop or the building, they would have to go through a separate process for advertisement regulations to deal with that as well. Okay.
Okay. Without further questions being indicated, I'm going to then move us into debate. So just to remind everybody, this is the opportunity to give your views on anything that you think about this application. I'm not necessarily looking for proposals at the moment, but you're welcome to indicate where you feel that you are or any concerns that you want to sort of air and discuss. But just to remind you, as I always do, that there's no need to repeat if somebody's just spoken and said loads of great points, you don't need to repeat them all. You can just say, I agree with what that person said. But it's open to members to make any contribution or comments. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. This feels like another important milestone. I think there are a few of us who were on the original planning committee in 2018, I think it was. The outline, I was looking back at some of the outline content and some of it I'd forgotten, but some of it I think is particularly pertinent to this application where he talks about the things that were hardwired in there in terms of employment skills and training method statement, so that this building, if it's approved, can be a place where York people work and thrive and learn. And I think the building itself, in terms of the detail of what we're looking at today, I think is an exemplar, particularly in terms of its environmental features, which we haven't focused on in huge detail. It really does set a benchmark for other developments on this site as and when they come along. And I sort of welcome the fact that the developers have gone above and beyond in terms of provision of blue badge parking. And obviously, yes, it'll be important to keep that under review. And I think the amendment suggested in terms of clarifying the sections of parking that really are non-negotiable is important. I think as in with lots of major applications where there's a travel plan in the mix, I think it will be critical for that to be comprehensive. And I think this travel plan, probably more so than most, because I think the expectation is that it will need to be sufficiently detailed to support a step change in terms of expectations around how people are expected to travel to this building. And I think some of the concerns expressed by the Holgate Ward Planning Panel will need to be addressed head on in terms of addressing the concern that there will be overspill parking into neighbouring communities if it's felt that the incentives or the disincentives in terms of persuading people not to drive are not sufficiently strong and well developed. I mean, I think in terms of the building itself, I spend some of my time in Wellington Place, which is a similar building in Leeds, and it has worked in terms of a concept, in terms of having various bits of government and non-governmental organisations working together. I think it could, be greater than the sum of its parts. So it's certainly a very welcome development and one worthy of support, I would argue.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Melly and then Councillor Benbert.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't on the original committee that looked at the outline application, but I was interested. I did watch it. I did go on the site visits. So we were told about, this sort of development, and we looked at the place and where it'd be. And I think this is more or less as expected. Maybe that we've asked very few questions about things like the design and the scale and the massing, and maybe that's because this is what we had expected through all the consultation and outline and everything. But I think a lot has changed since that original outline application. That was pre-pandemic. So a lot of what we were told about the economic benefits that this would bring maybe have changed now, whereas in the past it might be 2,600 jobs in York, with all that money being paid to people in York, being spent in York. Now maybe it's half of it would be people in York, and the rest will be people working from home, possibly even hundreds of miles away. So I think the economic benefits this would bring are less now, and I think we should take that into account when weighing up the planning balance. And there's also been changes in terms of, since then we've got a new transport strategy and a new transport plan and a new approach to movement and place, and how you create place and movement through places. So with that in mind, I do have concerns about the cycling and pedestrian routes. This is the second reserve matters application we've had in a row with really bizarre transport designs. We talked about desire lines last time when we were talking about the crossings just not being on desire lines, pedestrian crossings in places where pedestrians won't want to cross, and no crossings in places where they will want to cross. I think if the desire is to have a very low car, essential vehicle journeys only by car, and apart from that, a car-free development, and you want to encourage people to walk and cycle, setting up cycle routes, which involve cycling around the entire building, crossing 2 or 3 pedestrian zones, I think that puts off pedestrians and cyclists. So I do have concerns about those aspects of the plans. But having said that, I think weighing those concerns up in the planning balance, I would still probably be comfortable to support this application, given everything else, all the other aspects of it. Everything else seems satisfactory in terms of ecology and landscaping and scale and massing and design and materials and that sort of thing.
Thank you. Councillor Benbert.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch on a couple of points. So I've just wanted to say how positive it is to hear about the zero car aspirations for the scheme. I know we talk a lot about concerns around that and how it's going to work fundamentally, but I think that's something that we should be very pleased to be seen as an aspiration for how this is going forwards. I think the two main concerns that we're left with were the cycling element and how that access works, but really I see it as a design concession in terms of trying to achieve other goals, and I think through the conditions that are already there in terms of signage, we'll be able to resolve that. So I don't have any, not resolve it, but mitigate it, and essentially it's an acceptable level of risk as far as I can see.
And then last one I wanted to touch on was just, I raised a point about the frontages before, along Hudson Boulevard. I just wanted to touch on something you said, Councillor Fenix. I work near Wellington Place as well, which is obviously a big part of what this has been designed around and the thinking comes from. And there isn't, you'd like to see more frontage along that road still in terms of the type of retail space or cafes, whatever it is, to try and liven it up. But we're not going to get that. But I think what Wellington Place does really well is working with the council and the tenants and everyone else to kind of make it a growing organic space in terms of street traders and everything else. And I guess I think that's just a comment to take away as you move forward, to think about how that can continue to be improved as it develops beyond what's already been offered on the plans. But otherwise, happy to support it, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I've never been to Wellington Place, and I was busy trying to Google it and put that on my list of places to visit next time I'm across in Leeds. I think obviously echo most of what's been already said. This is a key milestone for the city. I think, as the applicant mentioned, it is having that anchor tenant in there that will start to really drive this development forward. I think we often forget, I was told quite early on when I was a councillor, that this particular site, not this particular site, but the wider York Central site, is something roughly akin to the same as the city centre we have now. So the development potential and the opportunity of making sure we get this right and actually getting the right building in the centre of that is vitally important, and we should stick to that. I take on board Councillor Melly's comments about how many people will be there and where they come from. I do wonder, the world has changed, I think, post-pandemic, and we were discussing this the other day. People do often work just like a 2 to 3 day in the office, day not in the office. So you might still get 2,300 people each doing 2 days on each different day, and that does give us opportunity to create additional jobs and create those opportunities for people living out round and about and actually having those fantastic linkages. So, for example, developments at Haxby Station would allow people to be able to come in by rail to do their 2 days a week, even in the wider area. And I know Councillor Stewart and I were talking to the Mayor the other day about how we deliver that increased level of housing across the York and North Yorkshire as an area while maintaining links to key particular areas. So actually getting people out and closer to York, getting even more people and more jobs to be able to fit into this is absolutely important. And again, I think I agree with Councillor Melly about the fact that we weren't talking about a lot of the detail. And I think you're right. I almost crossed out my comment in terms of that one, but I think it is sort of a mark of how well the applicant has done and what's come through, that most of those issues that we normally spend so long talking about, designs, materials, all the complexities, we haven't had to, because most of that has been got pretty much right how we would expect it. So I think there's a bit of compliment there towards the work that's been done, which is what left us with the nuances, and that's what's sort of incredibly frustrating that we've had to spend so long on. But it's possibly one of the most frustrated I've ever been, and I've spent many times looking back on planning meetings and going, was I right about that particular application? Was I not right? And I'll wait to see on this one. I mean, take on board the comments the chair made earlier that people will follow the cycle route if they do it. I just reflect on the journey I take from my ward to this office today by bicycle. I have at the top of Heworth, well, Malton Road, which I often use there, we have completely segregated off-road cycle lanes that hardly anybody uses in large areas, because it takes you off the main road, which means you lose priority at junctions. So you either use the off-road cycle lock and stop every time you get to an end street, or just stay on the road when you can just actually cycle the entire way. And then adjacent at the end of that, you have Heworth Green, which is ridiculous at either end. At the particular end, as we get into town to the main roundabout there, it actually asks you to go off the road onto about a 1.2 metre segregated cycle path. That actually the best solution we came to that was to put a sign on saying, please get off, because people kept hitting pedestrians because it's just far too narrow to get over. And the best solution we could do was put a sign on saying, can cyclists please get off? So again, nobody uses that. People follow the main road around one of the most dangerous roundabouts in York. And at the other end, an even more ludicrous solution where the flower shop is at Monkstray, with a really bizarre set of 2 cycle lanes that run you all the way around the roundabout that tell you if you're turning right off the roundabout to go left, go past the left all the way around the other junctions, hope nobody tries to cut across and go through it. So again, nobody uses that one. So it's not always the solution that we get there. And it is really frustrating that we couldn't, whether we failed at reserve matters or not, I don't know, but we can't do anything about this. And I think it's really important we as a council learn from that, I think, because those problems will occur and all of us will see them happening and think, you know what, we knew that was going to happen and we couldn't do anything. But I think apart from taking those lessons learned away and thinking about how we can actually do this better in future, as a committee and in terms of how we get reports to us as well, I think happy to support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Chair, I take the point somebody made, I can't remember who it was, about this building being a very, very large building. And it is very prominent. However, don't forget, it's going to be in the middle of another lot of, or next to a lot of very large buildings as well when this is built, when the site is built out. And I think its prominence will be reduced. It's actually not an attractive building. It's made of brick and it reflects the railway architecture that's next to it, which I think is great. There is some harm to the designated heritage assets nearby, but I think the economic aspects of it do outweigh that. I mean, it's a less substantial harm to those heritage assets, and the economic benefits are considerable. With what Councillor Melly said about the number of jobs that are on site, I think you should remember that hubs like this very often act as jobs multipliers. Some of you may remember the Central Science Laboratory at Sand Hutton, which is now, I can't remember what it's called now, DEFRA, is it? Ferrer, that's it. I was originally heavily involved in getting that to that site because we wanted the jobs for the North York, Southern Rydale area. Within a year, the King's Pool development had been allocated on the back of that because the Central Science Laboratory had moved there. A lot of the expertise was shared with DEFRA, and so they went to the King's Pool site. So it will attract new jobs in to support the people who are there. I think as a building, it's environmentally extremely attractive. It's got ticks all the boxes as far as energy conservation and being green. So I'm perfectly happy to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I think I'd agree with all the comments made is the sort of short answer. The longer answer is that I think that it is, for me, an acceptable development. It's quite a good development. I think just to sort of curtail Councillor Ayres' plans for a day out at Wellington Place, I would maybe say it's not quite all that might be hyped. And I think my sort of contrast from Wellington Place to this development is that Wellington Place is, I don't know, is it 8 blocks or something like that? But it's very much a well-designed place for people who work, and there's a bit of stuff around and everything like that. You can go to lots of places, it's quite functional. Hopefully this location will be a bit more than just for those who work. So hopefully it will be somewhere you can fall out of the station and go for something to eat or those sorts of things as well as work there, and you can use it as a sort of hub and a core. So I think this development has a bit more to it potentially than that. So from my point of view, there are things that we've explored. Obviously the cycling aspect and the blue badge, I think they are doing well. I still don't really understand the end users saying, look, we'll only need 2 blue badge spaces, and I think it's welcome that the developer's not gone down that route. But for me, in the whole planning balance, which it always must be, I'm minded that for me this comes well above where we need to be to get approval.
Thank you. I'm not seeing further hands, so I'll just add in my 2 penneth worth before we consider the recommendation. And echoing many of the points that have been said, I think it's really nice actually to hear an applicant come and say, we're not looking at what we've done previously, we're looking forward for the type of development that we want to see, not just in this particular application, but for the broader site. And I was sort of minded to, I was thinking of that, in planning to be sort of saying, build it and they will come. And actually to hear that rejected in terms of a car park, because I absolutely agree that you put a 2,000 capacity car park and 2,000 cars will come. If you challenge people and provide alternative ways for people to access the site, then they'll do that. And I think that if this is an example of the ambition for the wider York Central site, then this is really, really positive. I think the issue around the blue badge bays and the provision there, I did have some concerns about. I'm satisfied in terms of the amended condition if we go with that there's enough there to ensure that there's a minimum amount of blue badge retained, and I would just hope that the review that takes place over the course of the next 12 months, the 12 months from occupation, is robust as well in terms of making sure that if blue badge bays are needed, they're retained, and in the same way that build it and they will come. Actually, if you want to be an employer that's attractive for people, who require blue badge access, then having sufficient bays available. I know that people at this building often end up competing with each other to get access to the limited number of blue badge bays, and that certainty that you will be able to park and you will be able to access a building is really, really important. Likewise, it's really good to read that actually there's accessible toilets at every level of the building, that there's level access throughout the building as well. It's not just about getting there, it's about how you use the building itself. Just a couple of notes in terms of probably more to do with the development of the rest of the site, but in relation to this, because I think the point's been made that this is a large building that will end up being surrounded by other large buildings. And having lived in Edinburgh for 10 years and knowing the sort of wind tunnels that are created as you know, large buildings either side on a sort of wet, windy February afternoon, it's not the nicest place to be walking up and down. And I think there is some mention in the report about mitigation through trees and that sort of thing. But it's just ensuring that that is continued again throughout the development of the site. And finally, you know, I think just to take us back to where we started really this evening in terms of tactile paving and those elements of the accessibility, I think it's encouraging to hear everybody talking the talk in terms of we want that consistency of approach across the whole of the development, and you know, we feel that, I think the officers have assured us that they have the tools in terms of the conditions and what have you. I think there is still a need for reassurance amongst the disabled community that they are being listened to at each stage, and that we're not just saying the right thing to get over this particular hurdle. It is about the delivery in terms of actually making the whole of these spaces accessible and usable. And so, you know, again, just in more general terms, in terms of how the site's developed out, I think the sooner that we can demonstrate that these things are actually happening on the ground, the better it will be, because I appreciate we're a little bit chicken and egg, but it is really, really, really important that it's not just lip service that's paid. But with all of that said, you know, I think you know, this has everything that it needs to be that sort of you know, instigator of how the rest of this site is developed out. My only other point is I would agree entirely with Councillor Stewart about there being far too many references to Hudson in York in general, given his character, but in particular in this site. So I will invite members to make a proposal testing the recommendation. I did see Councillor Melly's hand, although I've seen Councillor Fisher. Was this?
It was a question actually, which I should have asked earlier, but I didn't think of it.
In which case, hold that thought for 1 second, Councillor Melly.
It was a question about this blue badge parking, and so in the last reserve matters application we talked about access a lot, access to the new public square and access to the NRM and where the blue badge parking would be, where all the nearest parking would be. And we were told that there was going to be blue badge parking in the new multi-storey car parks that would be within, you know, I can't remember like how many meters it was, but a sort of for a lot of people accessible distance from this building and from the NRM and from the square. If those car parks aren't built, do you know if the plans include other blue badge parking, or is there a risk of these spaces being some of the only blue badge parking spaces available, in which case it might be difficult to actually enforce them being used only for this building? I'm just wondering, in terms of condition 6 and it being a 12-month period from this development coming into full use, whether it needs to be, you know, once more of the site has come into use, when we actually know what needs there are for the whole site. Because I know it's difficult when you can only look at the application in front of you, but we do need to think about this whole site and how it's all going to fit together rather than looking at it in too much of a segmented way.
I see what you're saying and I understand that, but you've got to consider the reserve matters in front of you at this moment in time, and the need for the disabled spaces and the work that's been done in the background with the access officer and working out the numbers and the condition, and if you amend it, there will be sufficient for this development. It's not for this development to then accommodate further developments coming forward. That would need to be looked at each stage. The reserve matter, I know what you're saying about the reserve matters, and it envisaged the multi-storey car park coming forward, but that's a completely separate application to this one.
in hindsight, I should have asked the applicant, but I know that's too late now, but in terms of making sure that there is enough blue badge parking for visitors and employees that will be using this building in this development that we have in front of us, how will it be enforced that it's for users of this building only and not for people using the wider development?
So, yeah.
So like a kind of gated access.
Controlled access to the blue badge bays. So I suspect that that would be some of the answer.
Yeah.
I think I take your point and I hear exactly what you're saying. I think we possibly move out of the realm of this application and into needing to ensure that the applicant is clear about the aspirations for the broader site. I think I've probably heard from some of what's been said today that there does seem to be an acknowledgement and understanding about car light, meaning you know, anybody who doesn't need access with a car is given alternative ways, but that there is a recognition that there will still be people who need access, which I think is the point that you're making, Councillor Melly. But the outline will have hopefully given enough tools to officers in terms of future applications coming forward to ensure that there's existing things. I suppose the case that we're talking about here, though, is an application that has been approved with some reference to blue badge car parking, which may now not be delivered, and how that is accommodated. But I think that's probably a question for that previous application and how that's managed going forward, rather than for the determination of this particular application.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, if we're testing the officer recommendation and that has, you know, this specific wording of condition 6 in it, I want to be sure that, you know, a 12-month period after this development comes into occupation is a suitable time to then reassess the blue badge parking need, rather than when more of the site has been developed. But it sounds like it is, because it's controlled, that this blue badge parking is specifically for this development and won't be used for anything else. And we can be sure that there will be enough blue badge parking for the needs of this building in the future, because that's controlled by a different way, by kind of gated access. Yeah.
I think from the nods and from the discussion, I think yes, that as far as we can, and I think that then there perhaps is the opportunity to have that further discussion on the broader site with, you know, officers and others going forward. So with that in mind, I think I saw Councillor Fisher stick your hand up when I was asking for proposals, and I've just seen Councillor Jane Burton as well. So Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite happy to move approval on this. I did look at in view of the issue with blue badge parking, I did look at condition 6, and it does say the council has the final right to decide in writing what the level of blue badge parking is and saying how many can be removed. So I think that probably covers concerns about that. So I'm quite happy with that.
Sorry, just to be clear, you're suggesting you don't feel that you need to amend condition 6. We may just need to have a little discussion then on that specific point, because I think for where I am, the distinction between, I absolutely hear what you're saying, that there's the opportunity for the planning authority to review and have the final say. But I think having heard that a potential future occupier is only wanting 2, and having had the applicants saying that they're very happy to ensure that I think it was 8 in the yard are retained, and that the review only pertains to the potential development site on F1B. For my money, I would like to see that reflected in the condition, so that we're absolutely cast iron that we're only looking at a potential loss of 8 and no more than that.
I'm quite happy to that, but I thought that if this authority says that we want to retain the 8 on the main part of the site, we can do that, because we have the right to say what the level of car parking removed is.
Well,
I'm quite happy to amend it.
Yeah. For the sake of argument, my view would be that we should amend it. If I can just see by a very quick show of hands, all those in favour of amending condition 6 to reflect that tightened wording. Yeah, I think that's a majority, and you were happy as well. So yeah, so with that amended condition 6, you're proposing the officer recommendation to approve, and I think Councillor Burton, you had your hand up. I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Melly, as well.
I was just briefly going to say that internally the building looks very accessible, That's very good. And what I didn't ask about, and I just presume it's going to be level 3 access into the building with no steps. Yeah.
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah. And you know, if we can all go through the front door, it'd be much better than going into the back door for disabled access, because I don't know how everybody else would feel going in the back door every day to work. It's not great. It's not a good start to the day.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
So there is level access to the main entrance and all of the secondary entrances. Okay. I would like to propose adding a condition about tactile paving, very similar to the one that we applied to the last application, for consistency and to just give that extra strength to highways officers when they do come to negotiate that discharge of condition.
I'm just going to take advice from the officer on that.
It would be, yeah, consistent with the condition we applied to another reserve matters application for a, you know, adjacent site.
I think as we explained earlier, it's not consistent because it's a completely different type of application that you were looking at before in terms of the access arrangements. You can't, well, I'm going to look at Sandra, I'm coming to Sandra in a minute, but if it's already covered by an outline condition, it's not reasonable to add it as an additional condition on a reserve matters. We don't consider that you need it for this case, given the minimum, literally, given that we've said before, the tactile paving is this minor area here, not minor, that's the wrong word, this area here, and potentially an additional area here that is nowhere near in the same as it was for the central square. That was a completely different aspect. It was public realm, there was different crossings, it worked completely differently, and it was reasonable to put it on that application. Officer advice is that it isn't reasonable to put it on this one because of the reason, basically because of what I've just said. It's already covered in the outline and that is considered sufficient, and it's not reasonable, so it wouldn't pass the test in terms of the conditions.
Sorry, but it's the same outline application.
No, but it's a different, it's your reserve matters were different, they're considering different, and it was considered reasonable on the original square application because of the public realm and the interactions between all the different issues that there were there, the different crossings. It was considered reasonable in that case to do it. This case, there's nowhere near the of need or requirement for tactile pavement to any degree. There's not potentially there's not even the need for the red colour that we're going down, as Tony explained. So we don't think as officers it's reasonable to put a condition that's already covered through your outline because it's a different set of circumstances.
So, sorry, I'm just trying to understand this. Access is a reserved matter, isn't it?
Yes.
Does this not come under the reserve?
Yeah, because it's covered under a condition of your original outline that specifically requires your pavement condition, pavement materials. So it's already covered through your outline condition. So you don't need to add another condition, given it's already there.
Okay, I think that the colour of tactile paving is just as important at an unsignalled crossing, if not more, because it's how you know that this is a crossing point. There is a drop curb here and a drop curb on the other side, and it is a crossing point. And if anything, it's more important to note there's a crossing here because there aren't, you know, flashing lights or buttons or beeping. So
it's not that I disagree with you. It's covered through the original condition. It's a completely different set of circumstances. That's my officer advice. I've given the advice there.
Thank you. Well, I had Councillor Culloch indicating as well, which I wasn't sure whether that was on this point as well.
I think you were inviting a comment from Sandra. I'd just be happy to hear it.
Chair, yes, I agree with what your planning officers are telling you is that your officers are satisfied that sufficient controls to deal with tactile paving, the colours that may be necessary are already addressed, and that condition and that control exists through the outline, and therefore to add a further condition would not meet the necessary test because such a condition is simply not necessary in this case. It's already dealt with and controlled through the outline sufficiently.
Okay, thank you. I will come back to you in 1 second, councillor Melly. Councillor Ayer, you
Yeah,
wanted to make-
I suspected that was going to be the answer, so I was going to suggest that we add an informative rather than a condition to make the views of the committee known in terms of that. That way it's on there, but we.
Councillor Melly.
So I'm not trying to argue, I'm just genuinely trying to understand. If it's not asking any extra of the applicant or developer, if it's only, if an extra condition would only be requiring them to do what would be required anyway, then how can it be unreasonable if it's not asking anything extra or different?
Sorry, because it's already covered as part of the outline condition 24. So it's not reasonable to add an extra level in there that is already covered.
Unreasonable?
And Chair, just to add to what Becky's saying, if I may jump in as well, we shouldn't duplicate conditions that already exist on the outline consent, which is what I think this would be doing, because the control already exists. It wouldn't be adding anything that's not already addressed.
Okay, I think we're probably at a point where there's the officer advice. If there seemed to be some nods when there was mention of an informative. If perhaps we could find some wording of an informative just to make clear about that consistent approach across the whole of the site and making sure we're following appropriate guidelines. I don't know whether it's reasonable to ask within an informative that people like the Access Forum, appropriate groups are taken into account within those discussions, or whether it's.
We don't usually, because
think
we've got that's
yeah.
our access officer. He will liaise with them, so we've got to be reasonable in it as well. An informative say that requesting a consistent approach is entirely reasonable to put as an informative.
Okay, councillor Corbett.
Thank you, Chair. We've had a proposal that this application is approved. I'm assuming that the discussion since, including the potential informative, could be included within that proposal, and therefore I'm more than happy to second.
Thank you very much. I had noted that we hadn't had a seconder yet, so that was where I was going to get to. Okay, so unless anybody has anything burning, noting that it's 7:25, the proposal has been, for approval, has been seconded with the condition to be amended and an informative to be added. So Becky, if you could just summarise and then we'll go to a vote.
So the application is recommended for approval based on the conditions in your agenda and an amended condition 8, which reviews 6, sorry, I mean 8 spaces. Condition 6 to review 8 spaces in plot F1B and then 8 spaces in plot F2 to be retained in perpetuity. Then an informative with regard to a consistent approach in terms of tactile paving throughout the development.
Okay, so if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal. And anybody against? Any abstentions? So that is passed unanimously and approval is therefore granted subject to those conditions. So thank you everybody for your time this evening. With no urgent business, I can now close the meeting and say thank you all for attending.